Welcome to the full authentication tutorial in Next.js version 14. In this comprehensive tutorial, you will learn everything you need to know about authentication in the latest version of the Next.js. We will use the latest features of the Next.js version 14 to set up a real-world authentication project. We will start by setting up the Prisma for keeping the user data in our database. Then we will configure the latest version of the Next-Auth, and I will teach you every detail of the Next-Auth that you might need in your project, including Next-Auth Callbacks. We will create a sign up or register user page and go through every detail of creating a nice sign up form, including form validation, password strength checker, and then we're going to create a server action for inserting the new user into our database. And then I will show you how we can create a nice custom login page or sign in page for your application, and then how to integrate it with Next-Auth. We will also set up an email sending system and create dynamic email layouts and send activation email to users upon their sign up with an activation link for activating their account. And also we will create a forgot password and reset password pages in this tutorial. I will show you how we can check whether a user is signed in or not in client components and also in server components. And finally, I will show you how to protect your pages from unauthenticated users in several ways, and then I will tell you which one is the best. Welcome to Sakura Dev channel, and without extra explanation, let's get into it. Okay, let's begin. In the first step in our tutorial, we need to create a brand new Next.js version 14 project. So here I'm going to use Bound for creating our Next.js project. So here I'm going to say Bound X and then create next app and then add latest. I'm going to name it Next.js 14 full authentication, and I'm going to go with the default options here. So as you can see, the Bound created our Next.js project with just 3 seconds. This is really fast, and actually this is one of the reasons that I use Bound for my projects. The other reason is that it is completely compatible with NPM. It means that throughout our project, we can use NPM or Bound interchangeably without any problem. So it's up to you to choose between Bound or NPM in this project. The result is all the same. Okay, so now let's go to the project directory and let's open it up in VS Code. Okay, so let's make it a little bigger. Okay, so that's it for this step. And in the next step, we need to install and configure the Prisma for this project. Okay, so in this section, we're going to install and configure Prisma for our application. So here I open up the terminal, and here I'm going to say bound add Prisma. You can do it with npm install Prisma. This is the same. Okay, it is installed, and now we need to initialize the Prisma. So here we can use bound for that or npx interchangeably. I'm going to say bound x Prisma init, and then I'm going to set the data source provider. And for simplicity of our tutorial, we're going to use SQLite in this project. So I'm going to use SQLite for this project. So here I'm going to set it to SQLite. So here, as you can see, it creates a Prisma directory for us. And if I open it, you can see we have the schema.prisma file inside it. And here you can see the provider is set to SQLite, and the database URL is being read from a database URL variable inside our env file. So if I go to the env file, you can see it creates a database URL variable and set it to file, then /dev.db. So it means that we're going to create a dev.db file, a SQLite database file in the same path of the schema.prisma file. Okay, and now let's get back to our schema.prisma file, and now we can create our models. Okay, so in order to create our models, let's go to the auth.js website and let's go to the documentation and let's click on the get started and go to the database adapters. I'm going to choose the Prisma adapter here, and then here I can grab the models from this script here. And then here in the schema.prisma example, we can grab the models here. So let's copy them and let's get back to our schema.prisma file and just paste them here. Okay, so as you can see, we have some error here, and that's because these annotation here only works with the PostgreSQL, and since we are using SQLite, we just need to remove them. Okay, and just remove this one and we're good to go. So as you can see, we have a account model, a session model, a user model, and a verification token model. So keep in mind that for most section of this tutorial, we just need the user model. But you will see at the end of this tutorial usage of the accounts and session and verification token models in this tutorial. So we're going to focus on the user model. Our user model has an ID, name, email, email verified, image, and some relationship with the accounts and session model. So let's customize the user model for now. We're going to split the name to first name and last name. So let's change it to first name. Okay, and then remove the question mark here. The question mark makes this field to accept null values. We don't want that. Okay, so I remove that. And then let's add another field here, last name, and set its type to string. Okay, and we also need a passport field. Okay, and let's set its type to string as well. Okay, and let's just add a phone, and let's remove the question mark from email here. We don't want it to accept null values. And let's just add a phone field into the user model and set its type to string. Okay, so that's it for the user model. As I said, just focus on the user model. We don't need the other models until the end of this tutorial. Now we're done with the user model, and in order to create our database from this schema file, we need to run a migration. So I open up my terminal again. Let's clear this up. Okay, so in order to run a migration, let's just use npx this time. Okay, I'm going to say npx. You can use boundx as well. The rest is all the same. So here I'm going to say npx prisma migrate dev, and then set a name for this migration. I'm going to set it to just first migration. Okay, so let's run that, and you can see it creates the dev.db file inside the Prisma directory, and it also installed the Prisma client for us. And now we are ready to use Prisma client in order to access and route CRUD operation with our database. Every time we need to run a CRUD operation with our database with Prisma, we need to instantiate a new instance of Prisma client class. Obviously, this is not a good idea, particularly when we frequently do CRUD operation in our database. So the better idea is to create one global Prisma client instance, and then every time anywhere inside our project we need to access to our database, we can use that global Prisma client. So now let's create a global Prisma client. So here inside the src directory and side by side of our app directory, I'm going to create a directory called lib, and then inside it, we're going to create a TypeScript file, prisma.ts. Okay, and to speed up the process, let's just paste some code that I've got from the Prisma documentation. So as you can see here, we're going to create an object for keeping the global Prisma client. And here, when we are going to instantiate a new Prisma client, first we're going to check inside that global for Prisma object. If there is not a Prisma client instance inside it, we're going to create a new one and set it to Prisma here. And here we're going to check if we are not in the production environment. We just keep that Prisma instance inside our global for Prisma object, and then just export that global Prisma client from this file. So now let's save this, and now anywhere, anytime throughout this application, when we are going to do a CRUD operation with Prisma, we can use this global Prisma client from this file. Okay, so now we're done with the Prisma section, and in the next section of this tutorial, we're going to install and configure the Next-Auth in our Next.js version 14 project. Okay, in this section of this tutorial, we're going to install and configure the Next-Auth in our Next.js version 14 project. Okay, so in the first step, we need to install the Next-Auth. I'm going to say add Next-Auth. Okay, it is installed pretty fast, and now we need to create a catch-all API route for the Next-Auth. So let's close the Prisma directory, and then inside the app directory, I'm going to create a directory called API, and then inside it, we're going to create auth directory, and then we need to create a catch-all route. So inside the square brackets, I'm going to put 3 dots here, and then Next-Auth. So pay attention to the spelling. It should be Next-Auth. And then inside this directory, I'm going to create the route handler, route.ts file. Okay, so this catch-all route handler will handle all API requests to the /API/auth and then /whatever, just like this and this. So now let's create the route handler for this catch-all route. So if you are familiar with how we can create a catch-all route handler for Next-Auth, you can skip to the next section. But if you're not familiar with that, watch this section till the end. So in the first step, we need to create an auth options object. So here I'm going to export const auth options and set its type to the auth options that comes from the Next-Auth, and then set it to an object here, And then here, the first thing we should specify is the providers list. So here I'm going to specify the providers list and set it to a list here. And inside this list, we can define our providers. So the providers are the particular ways of authentication in Next-Auth. For example, we have the credentials provider, which means that we are going to authenticate our user with a credentials. And these credentials could be a username and password or an email and password. The other popular providers of the Next-Auth are Google provider, in which we can authenticate our users with their Google account. And in this tutorial, we're going to define the credentials provider, which is the most basic one. And also we're going to use the Google and GitHub provider. So in this very section, we're just going to define the credentials provider. And in the upcoming section of this tutorial, we're going to implement the Google and GitHub provider as well. So now let's define the credentials provider. First, we need to import the credentials provider from the Next-Auth/providers/credentials. And now here we can use this credentials provider. So I'm going to put it here, credentials provider, and then pass an object to it. And in this object, first we're going to define the name for this provider. I'm going to set it to credentials, and next we need to define a credentials object. So here I'm going to specify the credentials and then set it to an object here. Defining this credentials object has two purposes. The first one is that it describes what are our credentials. So usually credentials consist of a username and password or an email and password. So we need to define them in this credentials object. And the second purpose of this credentials object is that Next-Auth can create a auto-built sign-in form from this credentials object. So with that in mind, let's define our credentials object. Let's say that our credentials consist of a username and password. So the first one is a username. Okay. And now we can set it to an object and we can define the input type in the Next-Auth sign-in page. And now in the username object here, we can define the input type for the username in the auto-built sign-in page that Next-Auth can create for us. So here we can set a label to it and, for example, set it to username. It would be the label of the username in the sign-in page. And let's define a type for the username input. I'm going to set it to text, and we can also define a placeholder for that. And let's just set it to your, for example, email. Okay, so we can just rename the username to email here, but it is more standard to use username as the username of the user. And let's just set it to your username. Okay, and now let's define the password for our credentials. So here I'm going to say password and then set it to an object, define a label for it. It's going to be password. Okay, and then let's define the type of the password input. Let's set it to password. Okay, and now we're done with this credentials object. So as you can see, we have an error here, and that is not because the credentials object. It's because we need to define a authorize function after the credentials object. So I put a comma here and define the authorize function. So I'm going to say async authorize, and then it takes the credentials object. Okay. And as you can see, after defining the authorize function, the error is gone. So what is this authorize function? So when a user in the sign-in page clicks on the sign-in button, the username and passwords are packed into a credentials object and will be passed to this authorize function. So in this function, we need to actually authenticate our user. In other words, we need to check the username and password inside the credentials object and decide if they are correct or not. So if they are correct, we just need to return a user object from this function. And if they are not correct, it means that the user is not authenticated. And in order to declare that, we just need to return a null value from this authorize function. Or we can just throw an error from this function. So since we are keeping the user data in our SQLite database, we can access them with the Prisma client. So first we need to search into our database to find a user that its username is in match with the credentials.username. So here I'm going to say const user and set it to await. So let's import the Prisma from the lib directory and then Prisma file, our global Prisma file that we have created in the previous section. Okay, and then access to the user model and then call the find unique function. Okay, and then put an object here, specify the where API, and inside that actually we are saying that we are going to find our user based on its email. So in the where object, we're going to set the email to the credentials, the username. Okay, so we are actually using the email of the user as its username. And here, as you can see, our credentials has the username and password inside it. So Next-Auth and TypeScript are smart enough to infer the type of the credentials from this object that we have defined earlier. So for example, let's rename the username to email, and let's open up the credentials object here, and as you can see now it has an email and password. So let's change it back to username because it's more standard in the authentication systems. So here let's set the email with the credentials, the username. Okay, and then after the find unique function, we're going to check if the user is existed or not. So here I'm going to say if not user, which means that the user is not found. We can just return a null, which means that the user is not authenticated, or we can just throw a new error here and set its message to username or password is not correct. And now if the user is existed, we need to check the provided password inside the credentials object, which is actually the provided password by the user in the sign-in page with the actual password of the user inside the user table in our database. So here we can say const is password correct, and here we can just naively check the credentials password with the user password. But as I said, this is a naive way of checking the user password in our database. So in the real world applications, the user password is not directly saved into our database. Before saving the user password, we need to hash it and then save the hashed form of the user password in our database. So here actually the user.password is the hashed version of the user password. So in order to compare the credentials.password, first we need to hash the provided password and then compare it to the user.password. So now let's comment this out and let's put a comment here. This is naive way of comparing the passwords. Okay, so let's do it in the right way. First, we need to install a package called bcrypt. So here, let's clear this up first, and then I'm going to use Bun for installing it, Bun add bcrypt. And then since we are using the TypeScript here, we need to install the types of the bcrypt. So here I'm going to say Bun add and then -d because it will be a dev dependency, and then add types /bcrypt. Okay, it is installed, and now we need to import the bcrypts here. So here I'm going to say import star as bcrypt from bcrypt module. Okay, and let's go back here, and first we need to check if the credentials.password is existed. So actually we are checking if not credentials.password. We can just throw an error that says please provide your password. Okay, and now we can say const is password correct and set it to await bcrypt.compare function. And now we can pass the credentials.password and the user.password. So it is really important here to provide the credentials.password first. So here I'm going to say credentials.password and then pass the user.password. The first argument need to be hashed and the second argument is already hashed. So as I said, it is really important to first pass the credentials.password. Okay, and here we can check if not is correct password, which means that the password was not correct. Again, we can throw a new error here and set its message to username or password is not correct. And if the password is correct, we can reach to the next line here, and here we just need to return a user object from this authorize function, which means that the authorization was successful. So now let's extract the password of the user from the user object and just return the user without its password. It's not safe to include the password in the returning user object from this authorize function. So here I'm going to say const and define a object here and set it to user. Okay, and let's extract the password and put the rest to an object called user without pass. Okay, and we can just return the user without path from this function. Okay, so we're done with the authorize function, and in this way we can authenticate our users with a credentials including a username and password. So the returning object of this user without path will be sent to the Next-Auth session and will be kept inside it. So every time we need to check if the user is authenticated or not, we can just check the Next-Auth session to see if the user is inside it or not. If the user is inside it, it means that the user is already authenticated, and if it's not there, it means that the user is not authenticated. So we need to redirect the user into the sign-in page. Okay, so that's it for the authorize function and the credentials provider. And now we need to create a handler from these auth options that we have created here. So here I'm going to say const handler and set it to Next-Auth function that comes from the Next-Auth/next, and then pass the auth options inside it. Okay, so here note that we don't need to export directly the handler from this file. Instead, we're going to rename it to the get and post function. So here, in order to do that, I'm going to say export handler as get function and also handler as the post function. Okay, so that's it for exporting the handler. And as I said, don't export the handler directly. And also we need to export the auth options here. So later in this video, you will see that when we are going to retrieve the session of the Next-Auth from the server, we need these auth options. We can use the getServerSession function, and we need to path the auth options here to that function. So we need to export the auth options as well as the renamed version of the Next-Auth handler from this file. Okay, so for now, that's it for the Next-Auth route handler, but we will get back to this file in the upcoming section. But for now, it is enough with this file. In this section, first we're going to create an AppBar, and then we're going to create the sign up or register user form for our application. And we're going to use the Next.UI as the UI library for this project. It is suggested by some of my subscribers, and it's just awesome for Next.js. So I'm going to use it throughout this project. And here the Next.UI web page, and here I'm going to go to the get started and click on the Next.js. So we need to install these two packages. Okay, open up my terminal here. Let's clear this out first and let's paste it here. I'm going to use the bond for installing that, but you can use the npm if you want. The bond is just faster. Bond add, and then add Next.UI and also firmware motion. Okay, and then we need to go back to the Next.UI documentation. And here, as you know, the Next.UI is based on the Tailwind CSS, so we need to do some changes to the tailwind.config file. So let's copy this here. Okay, and get back to our project. Go to the tailwind.config.ts file and put it here. And then just copy this here. And in the plugin, just call the Next.UI, and also we need to import the Next.UI here in the Tailwind config file. Okay, so save this, and then we need to set up a provider here. So I go back to my app directory, and here I'm going to create a provider.tsx. Okay, and let's go back to the Next.UI documentation and just copy that providers code here and put it here in the provider.tsx. Okay, and let's just rename it to providers. Okay, and then we need to go to the root layout of our application, and here just wrap the children with the providers component. So I'm going to use the providers and wrap the children inside the providers components. So if I go back to the providers component, you can see the children's are wrapped inside the Next.UI provider. It actually might be a context provider, and that's why we use the use client here. But the reason why we don't directly wrap the children of the root layout with the Next.UI provider is that if we are going to do that, we need to mark the root layout of our application with the use client, and this is not a good idea because it will turn the whole application to client components, and that is not desirable. So we just keep this root layout as a server component and just wrap the children of this root layout with a providers component, which is actually a use client, but this will not turn these children to client components. For more information, just check out this video. Okay, so let's get back to our project, and now let's create our navbar component. So in the app directory, I'm going to create a directory called components, and then inside it we're going to create our AppBar, which is actually the navbar of our application, appbar.tsx. Okay, so let's create a component here, and it will return a navbar component which comes from the Next UI, and then just go to the Next UI here and copy the code inside the navbar, the example code. Okay, and let's put it here. And we don't want the brand here. Okay, let's import the components, the navbar contents and navbar items. Okay, let's import all of them, and here let's first create a home link here which return to the /home, which is going to be our home page. And let's remove the other items here. For now we don't want them. Okay, and then we're going to create another content and set the justify to end, so it will push it all the way to the right of our navbar. And then here we don't want the login link here. For now, let's just add the sign up button and set its href to the /auth and then /sign up. Okay, so let's save this, and now this is actually our navbar, a really simple one. So now let's go to the root layout of our application, and above the children, let's put our AppBar, which is actually the navbar. Okay, so let's save this and let's run the application. For running the dev server, you can use bourne dev or just npm run dev. So let's just go with the npm run dev to show you that it's compatible with the bourne. Okay, and let's open it up in our browser. Okay, so let's enable the dark mode here. So I go to the tailwind.config.ts file, and here above the plugin, let's define the dark mode to class. Okay, and then let's get back to our root layout, and here in the HTML, let's set the class name to dark. Okay, so let's get back to our browser, and as you can see, we have the dark mode enabled in the navbar. And let's get back to our VS Code and go to the AppBar component and set isBorderEd to the navbar component. And let's get back to our browser, and you can see now we have a border at the bottom of the navbar. Okay, so that's it for creating our AppBar, and now let's create the sign up form or register user form for our application. In this section, we're going to create our sign up form for registering a new user. So here inside the app directory, I'm going to create a page here. First, we need to create an auth directory. Okay, don't confuse that with the auth directory inside the API directory. Okay, and then inside it, we're going to create our sign up route. And then inside it, we're going to create our page.tsx file. So let's create a component here. Let's rename it to sign up page. Okay, so in the first step, we need to create a 2-column grid. So here in the class name, I'm going to use grid and then grid =1. In case of mobile view and on medium screen and greater, we're going to set the grid to 2 and then set the justify to sender and also the items sender. Okay, so now we have a responsive 2-column grid. Now let's get back to our browser, and if I click on the sign up here, you can see now we are headed to the /auth.signup. Okay, get back to our project, and first we need to create a p tag here, and inside it we're going to say already signed up and then put a Next.js link here. Okay, and redirect the user to the sign in page. Let's set the href to the auth and then /signin, the wrap that we haven't created, so we're going to create it in the next section of this video. Okay, so let's add some Tailwind CSS classes here, or we can just use the link component that comes from the Next UI, so it is already styled and we don't need to style it manually with Tailwind CSS classes. So let's import the link here, and let's get back to the sign up form. And if I click on the sign in here, you can see it will redirect us to the 404 error page, and that's because, as I said, we haven't created the sign in page. So let's get back to our sign up. Let's put this p tag and sign in link together, so we need to put them inside the div here. Okay, and then let's wrap them inside that div, and let's set the class name to an MD medium screen or greater. Let's set the col span to 2, so it will span through 2 column on the medium screen or greater, and then just set the class name of the p tag to the text center and just put a padding here, P2. Okay, let's put a flex here and justify sender and also item sender as well. Okay, so here, as you can see, now we have the nice positioned message here. So now let's create our form here. I'm going to create a separate component for our form. So here inside the components directory, I'm going to create a signup form .tsx. Let's create a functional component here. For now, let's return a sign up for message. And now let's get back to the sign up page and just render it into the main div sign up form. Okay, and now let's put a image element. So I'm going to use the image component that comes from the Next UI. Okay, and set its src to /login.png file. So we need to put the login.png file inside our public folder. So obviously that's not there. So we're going to put it here in a second and set the alt to login form, for example. And let's define the width to 500 and also height to 500, and then let's close the tag here and let's put the login.png file inside this directory. Okay, so let's open it up in our file explorer and put it here. Okay, let's close this off and let's go to our browser, and as you can see, we have the image on the right column of our grid and the sign up form in the left column. So now let's design the sign up form. I get back to the VS Code here and go to the sign up form component, and here let's design our form. So in the first step, let's change the root div to a form element. Okay, and then let's add some Tailwind CSS classes. We're going to need a grid here with 2 columns. So I'm going to set the grid equals to 2 and a gap of 3 between the columns, a P2 for its padding, and we're going to add some shadow to it. Okay, add a border and a rounded MD for its border radius. Okay, so here let's define an input. So we're going to use the input component from the Next UI. So we're going to import it and let's set a label for it. The first one is going to be first name, and you can add an icon to this input. For example, let's say we want to add a user icon to it. So we can add the start content wrap, and now we can just render our desirable icon here. The start content will set it to the left side of our input. So for the icon library, I'm going to use a icon library that is completely compatible with Tailwind CSS, the hero icons. Okay, in the heroicons.com, go to the documentation and copy the script for installing the hero icon. Okay, let's create another terminal and let's paste the script here. Let's change it to the bond add, but you can go with the npm install as well. Okay, it is installed. So let's close this off. And now let's go back to the hero icon and search for a user icon. So it will be the user. So here let's render a user icon that comes from the hero icons. Okay, and let's put a class name here and w4 for its width. As you can see, we have used Tailwind CSS class, and as I said, the hero icons is compatible with Tailwind CSS. So we can use Tailwind CSS classes to style the icons here. Okay, so let's go back to our browser. And as you can see, we have a first name input here. So let's just make some gap between these 2 columns here. So I go back to the sign up page, and here in the root div here, let's put a gap 3. Okay, so here, as you can see, now we have some space between the image column and the form column. Okay, so let's get back to our sign up form again and put our second input, which is going to be the last name. Okay, you can see we have the last name. Then we're going to put the email. Let's change the label of the input to email. And let's go back to hero icon and search for the email. Okay, let's search the mail. And we have the envelope here. So let's get back to our VS Code and set the email to envelope icon. Okay, get to our Next.js app in the browser. So let's span it through 2 columns here. We're going to add a class name to our input and set its cool span to 2. Okay, so as you can see, it spans through 2 columns here. Okay, so I'm getting back to our VS Code and let's copy the last input and just change the label to phone. Okay, now we have the phone, so let's find a proper icon for it. Search for the phone here, and it is the phone. So let's change the icon to phone icon here, and let's get back to the browser. Okay, the phone icon here. And now let's put the password input. Okay, so let's copy the last one, change the label to password and set its type to password. Okay, so now let's get back to our browser, and as you can see, we have the password input here and the type of the password is password. So let's get back to our project. Let's change the icon to key icon. Okay, and then let's just copy that and set its label to confirm password. Okay, so as you can see here, now we have the confirm password and the icon is changed to a key icon. So now let's define a toggle password into our password input. Okay, so here we need to define a state here. I'm going to say const is visible pass and set is visible pass. Okay, use the use state here, and for the initial value, I'm going to set it to false. So since we are using the use state here, we need to set it to a use client. Okay, and also we need to define a toggle function. So here I'm going to say const toggle visible pass and set it to a function, and then just call the set is visible pass and use the pref value and set it to not of the pref value. Okay, and then here in the password input, we need to set the end content. We're going to use the conditional rendering here. We're going to check if the is visible pass is true. Then we're going to return a eye icon. Okay, just set its class to w4 and just cursor pointer. Okay, so let's remove the ending tag and let's actually import it from the hero icons, and on the onClick event of this eye icon, we just call the toggle visible pass function that we have just created. And then if the is visible pass is not true, we just return a eye/icon. Okay, and then just copy the class name and onClick function from the eye icon to this eye/icon. So let's save this, and here let's go to the type prop of the password input, and here let's set its type conditionally. We're going to check the is visible pass. If it's true, set its type to text, and if it's not true, let's set its type to password. Let's save this and let's go back to our browser. Okay, so as you can see, we have the eye/icon here. So you just need to change the order of the icons. When the is visible pass is true, we just need to render the eye/icon, and when the visible is false, we just need to render the eye icon. So let's get back here. As you can see, if I click on the eye icon here, we can see the password is visible. Okay, so now we can just conditionally set the type of the confirm password. So let's just copy the type of the password input and paste it here inside the confirm password. And here, as you can see, when you click on the eye icon here, you can see the type of both password and confirm password is turned to a text input. Okay, so now let's continue designing our sign-up form. We need to add a checkbox that user must accept the terms. So here I'm going to use checkbox components that comes from the Next UI. And then inside it here, I'm going to say I accept the terms, and let's put the terms inside the link here. So the links comes from the Next UI, and put the terms here, set its href to, for example, /terms. Okay, let's get back to our browser, and as you can see now we can check the accept terms here. So as you can see, this is a nice checkbox from the Next UI. Okay, so now we just need to add a submit button into our form. So let's get back to the VS Code, and here after the checkbox, we're going to render a button here, and the button element comes from the Next UI. So here I'm going to say submit as the caption of the button, and let's set its type to submit. Okay, so as you can see, the submit is on the right side of the checkbox. So let's put it under the checkbox. So I get back to VS Code and set the class name for the checkbox and set the cool span to 2 column. And let's set the color of the button to primary. Okay, so let's get back to browser. Let's move it to the center. So let's just put it inside a div here. Okay, I wrap the button inside a div and set a class name to the parent div. I'm going to set the flex and justify center. Also, let's set the cool span to 2. Let's get back to our browser, and you can see the button is now on the center of our form. So let's make it a little wider here in the button. Set its width to the W48, for example. And as you can see now, it is a little wider. Okay, so as a last step in this section, let's put this image element into the center of its column. So in order to do that, let's get back to VS Code and I go to the Signup page. Okay, in the parent div, let's replace the justify center with a place items center class. Okay, so if I go back to the browser, you can see that the image element is now in the center of its form, and we just need to stretch the form component. So I go back to VS Code and go to the Signup Form, and here let's add a class place self stretch. So let's save this. And as you can see now, the form element fills up all the width of its parent column. So yeah, that's it for this section. We have designed our sign-up form, and in the next section, we're going to implement the form validation with Zod. So now let's get into it. Okay, so now let's go back to our VS Code, and here let's open up the terminal and install the React hook form. So I'm going to use bun for that, bun at React hook form, and also Zod. Okay, and as you can see, these two packages are installed. So now let's close this off, and here outside the sign up form, for the form validation, we need to create our form schema with Zod. So here I'm going to say const form schema and set it to Z, which is come from the Zod package. So let's import it and then put the object here, Zod.object, and inside it we can define the elements of our schema. The first one is first name. So we have the first name, which is going to be Z.string. Okay, and then we can chain a min function. So the min length of our first name would be 2, and now we can define a message if these criteria would not be satisfied. So we can put a message here, first name must be at least 2 characters. Okay, and also we can chain the max function. For example, set maximum length of the first name, let's set it to 45, and we can define a message for it. So let's save this to break it down into multiple lines, and I'm going to set the message to the first name must be less than 45 characters. Okay, and also we can chain a regex for defining a regular expression for the first name, and inside it we can pass a new regex class, and then inside it define our regular expression. So let's break it down into a new line, and here I'm going to say our first name must start with a letter A to Z, and also uppercase A to Z, and put a plus here because we need to at least one letter, and then put a $sign to signify this is the end of our regex. And also we need to put a message here, so after that we can say no special character allowed. Okay, so now this is the pattern for the first name. We're going to copy that and paste it here as the last name. Okay, just need to change the first to last here and here. Okay, then we're going to define the pattern for our email. So I set a email key here and set it to Z.string. Okay, then change the email function, and we can just pass a message here and say please enter a valid email address. Okay, the next one is going to be phone, and we use phone and set it to Z.string, and then change the regex function to put a new regular expression for our phone, define a new regex and put our regular expression. Only numbers are allowed, so here I'm gonna put 0 to 9, and let's just put a length for it. For example, let's allow 8 number. So I think this is not a good idea to validate our phone number. Let's just go with a universal pattern. So let's save this and open up our terminal and install a new package called validator. So here I'm going to say bun add validator. It is installed. So we're going to remove the regex function, and instead we're going to use the refine function. So refine actually take a callback function, takes the value, and then here we can return true or false. If we return true from this callback, it means that the pattern is satisfied. And if it returns false, it means that the pattern is not satisfied, and we can return an error message. So here, instead of passing this callback, we're going to pass the validator, the package that we have just installed. So let's just import validator from validator. Okay, so we have an error here, and that's because it's not compatible with the TypeScript. In order to fix the problem, we need to install the types of validator. So here I'm going to say bun add -t add types validator. Okay, so the error should gone now. So now we can use the validator here, validator that is mobile phone. Okay, so in order to show you what is the validator that is mobile phone, it's a function validator that is mobile phone, and it takes a string here that should be a phone number, and if it's actually a phone number, it returns true, and if it's not, it returns false. So we pass this validator dot is mobile phone as the callback function to the refine function. So if the value of the phone is actually a phone number, it returns true, and the refine function will be happy with that. And if it's not a phone number, it returns false, and the refine function is not happy with that. So in case of it's not a phone, we're going to return an error message, please enter a valid phone number. Okay, and then we're going to define the password. It is going to be a z.string. Then the min length should be 6 character, and let's put error message for that. Password must be at least 6 character, and we can just put a max function. Okay, let's say the max length is going to be 50, and let's break it down to multiple line here and put an error message here. Password must be less than 50 characters. Okay, and the next one is going to be confirm password. Okay, and let's set it to the pattern of the password with min length. Okay, so now let's add the last one, which is going to be accepted, and it is going to be a z.literal because we want it to be exactly true. With literals, we can't directly set the error message. We need to put an object here and specify an error map function, which is going to return an object, and this object should have a message inside it. And now this is the error message in case of accepted is any literal except and true. So we're going to say please accept all terms. Okay, and here this is the form schema, and as a last step, in order to check if the password and the confirm password are the same, here at the end of the z.object we need to change the refine function. Okay, it takes the whole data of the object, and here we're going to check if the data that password equals to data that confirm password. So if these two are the same, we just return true, and the refine function would be happy with that. And if they are not the same, we can return a object here that contains the error message. So we're going to say password and confirm password doesn't match. Okay, and here we need to specify on which element we should put this error. So we have to define the path here. Okay, put a array here. We're going to set it to password and confirm password. Okay, so in case of the password and confirm password are not the same, we're going to return this message, and we're going to put the error on the password and confirm password. So yeah, that's it for the form schema. And in the next subsection, we're going to integrate the React hook form with the signup form and use this schema in the form validating. So let's get into it. Okay, so in this section, we're going to integrate the React hook form with our signup form. So here in the signup form, I'm going to use the use form. So I'm going to say const, and here set this object to use form, which comes from the React hook form. And now we should pass the input type as the generic type to this use form. So how we can get the input type, we're going to get it from the form schema object that we have created here with Zod. So let's get back here, and outside the form, we're going to say input type and set it to z.infer, and then set the generic type to the type of form schema object that we have created with Zod. Now we can use this input type in the use form. Okay, for now we don't need to pass anything more to the use form hook. We need to set the Zod resolver for form validation, but before doing that, let's extract the register function and handle submit, and also the reset function for resetting the form after the submit. Okay, so now let's go to the inputs of the form. So let's spread the register function here. Okay, and then pass the first name. Let's copy that and go to the last name and just change the first name to last name. Go to the email, put it here, specify email to this register function. Go to the phone, paste it here, and put the phone number here. Set it to password. Okay, and then do it with the confirm password. And as a last item, let's specify it inside the checkbox and specify the accepted here. Okay, and now let's go to the form and specify onSubmit and set it to handle submit function that we have extracted from the use form, and then pass a function. So I'm going to set it to save user function, which we haven't defined yet. So let's define the save user function. I'm going to say const save user and set its type to submit handler. That comes from the React hook form. So let's import it. And now let's set it to an async function. Okay, specify the input type in the generics. So this is the type of the save user function. And let's set async function to the save user. It takes the data. We don't need to define the type of the data because we have set its type here in the submit handler, and then define the body of this function. So for now, let's just log the data into the console. Okay, so now let's save this, and now let's go to our browser. Here we have an error on the regex function. So let's get back to the form schema. So here, as you can see, we have passed the error message to the constructor of the regex. We shouldn't do that. We should close the regex function here and then pass the error message here. And let's remove these parentheses here. And now we shouldn't have any error. So let's fix this regex again. Okay, let's save this and get back to our browser, and as you can see, the error is gone. So let's put some dummy data here. Okay, as you can see, we don't have to follow the form validation because we haven't yet enabled the form validation. And let's submit. So let's open up the console. We have an object here. Okay, and let's make it a little bigger. We have a problem here, and that's it. Accepted is undefined. It should return false. Okay, so let's get back to VS Code here. So it seems that the checkbox component of the Next UI doesn't work with the register function of the React hook form. So now let's do it another way. Let's use a controller component that comes from the React hook form. Okay, so now let's set the name, and you can see it doesn't have the autocomplete of the name, so it is not aware of what is the input type. In order to fix that, let's go to the use form here and extract the control from the use form, and let's get back to the controller component, and let's set the control to control that comes from the use form. And now if I open up the name, you can see we have auto completion. So I select the accepted field. We're going to have a render function in which actually we need to render our checkbox. So we need to pass in callback and then cut the checkbox here and pass it here into the render function. We should remove the register function from the checkbox, and here let's extract the field from the callback function, and here let's just spread the field. Okay, so we got a problem here, and that's because some of the field member is not supported with the checkbox. So let's do it manually. We're going to set the onChange to field.onChange, and let's set onBlur to field.onBlur. And now let's get back to our browser, and let's set the accepted here and click on the submit here, and now we have the accepted value. So let's uncheck the accepted. Let's clear this up, click on the submit, and you can see now we have accepted to false. So now we are integrated the React hook form with our signup form, and in the next subsection we're going to enable the XAuth validation in this signup form. Okay, in order to do that, we need to install the resolver of the React hook form. So I open up the terminal, and here, let's clear this up, install the hook form /resolver. So this time I'm going to install it with npm. Okay, it is installed, and let's close this up. And now we can go to the use form hook here and pass an object to it and set the resolver to the XAuth resolver, which is come from the hook form /resolver and then XAuth. Okay, and then pass the form schema to it. So now let's get back to our browser. So let's clear this up, and now if I click on the submit, you can see we don't have the data into our console, and that's because the XAuth resolver prevents the running of the onSubmit function. So all we need to do is to render the error message under each input. So in order to do that, I go back to VS Code, and in the use form hook here, extract the form state, and then from the form state we're going to extract the errors. Okay, and here let's go to the first input and specify the error message prop that is from the Next UI input and set it to errors that first name that message. Okay, so this error object is come from the form state of the use form hook. So let's save this and get back to our browser, and let's submit the form, and you can see now the error message is under the first name. So we can specify another props of the inputs, and that is invalid. We can set is invalid the next UI input to the errors that first name. Okay, so we need to set it to a boolean, which is at double exclamation mark, and that will turn the error.firstName to a boolean. So let's save this again and go back to our browser. Now if I click on the submit, you can see not only the error message is shown below the input, but the background and the label also shows an error on the input. So now let's do this with other inputs. Okay, go to the last name and put them here. We just need to change the errors to the error.last name, and here last name. Okay, go to the next input. It's email. I'm going to change it to errors.email. Okay, I'm going to do it with the next input, which is phone. Change it to errors.phone, and here let's go to the next input, which is password, and set it to error.password, and here next input, which is the confirm password, errors.confirm password, and also change it here. And in the next one, let's put it into the checkbox here. But here the checkbox doesn't have an error message prop, so we need to manually put the error here. So after the controller, we can render a p tag here, and we can conditionally say that if errors that accepted is there, turn it to a boolean value, and then put a and operator and render a p tag, set its class name to text red 500, for example, and put the errors that accepted that message. Okay, so now let's get back to our browser and click on the submit, and you can see now we have the error on the accept checkbox. So yeah, in this way we can actually enable the auth validation in our use form hook. So now let's put some valid data here. For example, let's put my name here. Okay, as you can see, when the pattern is satisfied, the error is automatically gone. Put my email. Okay, put a phone number here and put a password. For example, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So let's put a different password and the confirm password and click on the submit. So we don't have the error message here. So let's get back to VS Code. I go to the refine function of the form schema where we check the equality of the password and confirm password. And here, let's just remove the password and set the error on the confirm password. Click on the submit, and as you can see here, we have the error message. Looks like that we can set the error message only on one field. Okay, so now let's fix that. Let's remove the last character, and now both password and confirm password are the same. So here let's add another character, and as you can see, it shows us the error again. So let's remove that, and the error is gone. And let's open up the console here, and I click on the submit, and you can see we get the data with all its fields. So yeah, in this way we can create a beautiful form and enable the form validation with auth. So in the next subsection, we're going to create a password strength component to visualize the strength of the password that the user is putting in the password field. So we need to do it in two steps. In the first step, we need to retrieve the value of the password that is entering to the password field and calculate its strength. And then we're going to create a component that takes the calculated password strength as its prop and then visualize it in the sign up form. So without any explanation, let's do it. Okay, so we are in the sign up form, and here we should retrieve the password that the user has entered in the password field with the watch API of the use form, and then calculate the strength of the password with a package called check password strength. This is the package that we're going to use to calculate the strength of the password. Its name is check password strength, and this package gives us a function called password strength, and it takes the password and it returns an object that has an ID 0 for 2 week, 1 for week, 2 for medium, and 3 for strong. The returning object also has string value like 2 week, medium, and strong. So we're going to install this package and use it to calculate the strength of the password. So I go back to the VS Code and open up a new terminal here, And here we can install the check password strength with npm I or bourne add check password strength. Okay, as you can see, it is installed and now we can use it in our project. So let's close the terminal here and let's extract the watch API from the use form. Okay, and I'm going to create a state here, const, I'm going to call it pass strength and set pass strength, and I'm going to create it with use state, and the initial value is going to be 0, which means 2 week. And then we're going to create a use effect here. And inside this use effect, we're going to retrieve the password value from watch function and pass it to the password strength function from check password strength. So here, let's define the dependency array first. We're going to use watch the password, okay, and then here we're going to use the set password strength, okay, this is our state, and here we're going to call the password strength that comes from the check password strength package. Okay, let's import that, and then we're going to pass the value of the password with watch function and then password watch.password. It gives us an error here because the returning value of the password strength function is an object, but the set password strength expects a number. So here we can pass the ID of the password strength function. So as you can see, it has the value, length, ID, and contains. So we're going to pass the ID here, and that will be okay. So the pass strength state here is actually the calculated strength of the password. So now that we have the value of the strength of the password, we need to create a component that takes that value and visualize it. So here in the components directory, I'm going to create a new component and let's call it password strength. Okay, let's create a functional component here. Okay, and let's create an interface for defining the props of the components. I'm going to call it props. It is going to have a pass strength that is going to be a number. Okay, and let's take the props here. So set the type of the props to props, and let's extract the pass strength prop out of it. So actually in this component, we're going to create 1 to 4 boxes here based on the value of the pass strength. So if the pass strength is 0, we're going to create 1 box. If it is 1, we're going to create 2. If it's 2, we're going to create 3 boxes. And if it's 3, which means that it's too strong, we're going to create 4 boxes here to visualize the strength of the password. Okay, something like this. So here we're going to set a class name here. We're going to use flex, and we're going to set the gap to 2, for example. Okay, so here inside the div, we're going to create an array based on the pass strength and then map through that array and then create our boxes. So first we need to create the array based on the pass strength. So here I'm going to use the array class and then from, okay, then pass an object here, specify the length of array. It is going to be pass strength plus 1. Okay, so if it's 0, we're going to create 1 element, and if it's 3, we're going to create 4 elements. Okay, and now we have the array which its length is based on the pass strength, and then we can map through this array. Okay, we're going to use the I and also index. Okay, so let's put another parenthesis here because we have 2 parameters for the callback. Okay, and then return a div here. So let's set the key to index. I believe it is safe to use the index as the key for this div here because we're not going to manually delete or add to this array. So it is safe to use the index as the key. And then let's save this to break it down to multiple line here. And let's pass the class name. Okay, so let's use the CLSX function. So it is not installed. It is used for passing the conditional classes, as you know. So let's install the CLSX. So here I'm going to say bourne add and then CLSX tailwind merge. Okay, so we can use this CLSX, or we can just use the CN function, which is a combination of the CLSX function and tailwind merge function. So the CLSX is used for conditional class objects that you will see in a second, but tailwind merge is used to merge conflicting tailwind CSS classes. For example, if we pass 2 class for padding, for example P1 and P0, the tailwind CSS merge will pick up the second padding class and remove the first one. So it is used when we want to make sure that we don't have conflicting tailwind CSS classes in the class name list. So I use the CN class. It is really a good utility that we can use when we are using tailwind CSS in our project. So for example, let's say we want to pass the h2 for the height of our boxes, and then we're going to pass h3. So these are actually conflicting tailwind CSS classes. The CN function just pick up the second one and remove the first one. So if I import the CN function here, we can make sure that second edge class will be picked up by the cn function. So now let's remove the second one because we want them to be edge 2 and then w32 for the width of each box, and let's use the rounded md for the border radius of each box. Okay, and then we're going to pass a conditional object here for the background of each box. So we're going to use bg red 500 if the password strength is 0. So we're going to say if password strength is 0, just pick up this background color class. So let's save this to break it into the multiple line, and then we're going to use another conditional class. We're going to use bg orange 500 if the pass strength is 1, and bg yellow 500 if the pass strength is equal to 2, and then we're going to use bg green 500 if the pass strength is equal to 3. Okay, so let's save this, and now we can use this password strength component in the sign up form. So here I'm going to use it after the password field. So let's find it here. Okay, it is here, and then after the input of the password, we're going to use the password strength component that we have just created. Okay, we need to pass the pass strength prop here with the pass strength state that we have defined and set its value with the check password strength package. Okay, so let's save this. So if I go to my browser, you can see now the password strength here visualize the strength of the password. So let's put a random password here. Let's toggle the show password here, and as you can see, it is really a simple password. So let's add some special character to it. As you can see, the strength of the password is now changing. Let's add another one, use numbers. Okay, and then use some other capital letters, and you can see now the strength of the password says that it's a really strong password. So as you can see, the password strength is spanning through one grid column here. So let's span it on 2 grid columns. In order to do that, I go back to the password strength component here, and here in the class name of the parent div, we're going to use the cool span 2. Okay, so let's save this, and as you can see, it now uses 2 columns here. So here if I say justify around, okay, you can see it takes all the space of 2 columns. So now let's put a weak password. Now the password strength on the center, but we want it to be on the left side. So here we need to use the conditional object classes. Okay, here we're going to use the cn function again, and first pass these 3 classes, and then pass an object here and say justify around when the password strength equals to 3, and then pass the justify start when the pass strength is less than 3. Okay, so let's save this. We got an error here, and we need to add a parenthesis here. Okay, we're good to go. I get back to the browser. As you can see now, the password strength is on the left side. So let's put a strong password. Okay, now as you can see, the strength of the password is positioned well in the sign up form. So that's it for this section. We have created our sign up form with the Next UI library, and we use the React hook form and enable the form validation with the Zod package. So that's it for this section, and in the next section we're going to create a server action for inserting a new user into our database. So let's get into it. Okay, so I go back to the VS Code, and here I'm going to go to the lib directory, and inside it I'm going to create another directory called actions, and then inside it we're going to create a TypeScript file of actions.ts. Okay, in this file we're going to create the server action that related to the authentication. So the first step is to mark it with the use server. So now every function inside it is actually a server action. So now I'm going to create a register user function that actually takes a user and insert that user into our database using Prisma client. So here I'm going to say export async function, and we'll call it register user, and then it takes a user. So here we can set the type of the user to the user that comes from the Prisma client. Okay, but if I hover on this user type, you can see it has an ID inside it, and it is not an optional value. So I'm going to use the TypeScript utility types, the omit, okay, and then pass the user as its generic type. And here we're going to specify that we want to remove the ID from the user type. So now the type of this user parameter is the user without its ID. So now now we can define the body of the function. I'm going to say const result and set it to await. And now we can use Prisma client, our global Prisma client that we have created in the lib/Prisma file. Okay. And then we're going to call the user and then call the create function. Okay. And inside it, we're going to pass an object. It should has the data inside it. And we're going to set it to user parameter that we have created. So now let's test the function, and it has a drawback, and I will tell you in a second. So in order to test it, we need to go back to our signup form, and here I'm going to go to the onSubmit function. Okay, here it is, our save user. It's not onSubmit, it's save user function that we call when the form is submitting and the onSubmit props of our main form. So I go to the save user function. It's a submit handler of the use form. Okay, and here instead of the logging the data, we're going to create a user object from the data. So here I'm going to say const. So if I hover on the data, you can see it has a first name, last name, email, phone, password, confirm password, and accepted. So we don't need the last two, the confirm password and accepted. So we need to extract the confirm password and accepted from our data object. So here I'm going to say const and then set an object, set it to the data. Okay. And then here we're going to extract the accepted and also confirm password and then put the rest to the user object. Okay. So let's remove this backtext here. And now we can call the register user server action. So here I'm going to use a try catch block. Okay. And let's put the catch block first. Let's back to the try section. And here I'm going to say const result and set it to await. And now we can call the server action await and then register user server action. As you can see, it comes from the lib directory actions and the auth actions. Okay. And then we can pass the user object into it. We got an error here, and that's because our user object now just has first name, last name, email, phone, and password. But the user object that register user takes has first name, last name, password, email, email verified, phone, and image. So we need to remove the email verified and also image in the omit utility class. So I go back to the register user, and here let's put a over here and specify the email verified and also specify the image. Okay. Now let's save this, get back to the sign up form, and as you can see, the error is gone. Now we can just alert the proper message to user. We can use the alert function, or we can use some toast library like React Toastify. So in order to do that, let's install the React Toastify here. So I'm going to open up the terminal, and here let's clear this up. I'm going to say bun add React Toastify. You can use npm I React Toastify. Okay, it's done, and let's go here. And in order to use the React Toastify, we need to go to the root layout, and below the children, we need to use a component from React Toastify. It's the toast container components that comes from the React Toastify. So now let's go back to the sign up form, and now we can use the React Toastify. So I'm going to use the toast function, toast that comes from the React Toastify, and then call the success function and put a proper message to it. For example, I'm going to say the user registered successfully. Okay. In case of any error, let's catch the error. Okay. Here, I'm going to use the error here, and then inside the catch block, we can call the toast that error and put a message to it. For example, we can say something went wrong. Okay. And then we can log the error into our console. So here I'm going to say console.error and put the error inside it. Okay, so now let's go to our browser and test the result here. So for example, I'm gonna put my name, okay, my last name, my email, for example, let's say sakura23@gmail.com, put a phone here, put a password here, for example, 123456. As you can see, it's a weak password, okay, and accepted terms here, and click on the submit. So the toast function doesn't work properly, and that's because I forgot something, but the proper message is shown into the screen, and it shows that the user has been successfully inserted into our database. So now let's quickly fix the toast problem here. I think I should import the CSS file of the toast library, that the description of that is on the documentation of the React Toastify. So I go to the root layout, and here just import the React Toastify.css file that I've got from the React Toastify documentation. So let's save this. as you can see, now the user registered successfully message is shown onto the screen. Okay, so now let's go back to the VS Code, and here let's open up the Prisma Studio, X Prisma Studio. Okay, go to the user model, and as you can see, we have a user inside it, and the password is plainly saved into our database. So as you can see, the password is saved as 123456, no hashing. So this is a naive way of saving the passwords into our database. So I go back to the server action, the register user server action, and here first we're going to hash the password of the user and then save it to the database. So here in the data section of the create function of the Prisma, we're going to pass an object here, spread the user, and just set the password to the hash function of the bcrypt library. So we need to import the bcrypt here, import everything as bcrypt. You can just import the hash function only, but for readability, I just import all of them as bcrypt. And then I'm going to say from bcrypt module. Okay, and here I'm going to set password to await, and then bcrypt.hash function, put the user.password inside it, and determine the number of salt round. So the number of salt round determine the complexity of the hash. Okay, so you might remember that in the Next-Auth API route, in the authorize function, when we are going to compare the password with its hash form, we don't need to specify the number of salt round. The number of salt round is kind of hashed into the hashed password, and when we are using the compare function of the bcrypt library, it's going to extract the number of salt round from the hashed password. So we don't need to specify and worry about the number of salt round when we are going to use the compare function of the bcrypt. We just need to specify the number of salt round when we are going to hash a password. So now let's save this, and I go back to the Prisma Studio, and let's just remove the user. Okay, so I go back to the signup form. Let's zoom out. So now again, let's add the user. Okay, put my name here, my email, a phone number here, a 123456 password, confirm that, and click accept the terms. It complains about the email, so now fix that. As you can see, the user is registered. So let's go back to the Prisma Studio, and although our password was 123456, you can see now the password is hashed and then saved into our database. So in this way, with the help of the bcrypt library, we can hash the password of the user before saving the user into our database. Okay, so that's it for the register user server action. It's not completed yet. In the upcoming section of this video, we will go back to this function, and we're going to send an activation email to the email address of the user and send an activation link for activating the user account. But now we are going to test the sign up form of the Next-Auth and try to sign in with the user that we have just created in our database. But first, let's go to the AppBar component and add a sign-in link in the navbars. So in order to do that, let's create a separate component for the sign-in button and then put it in the navbar. So I go to the components directory and create a component and call it sign-in button.tsx. Okay, let's create a functional component here. So in this component, first we're going to check if the user is already signed in into our application. We're going to show the name of the user and a sign out button. And if the user is not signed in, we're going to show a sign in button. So here first we need to determine whether the user is signed in or not. So in order to do that, we can use the useSession hook that comes from the Next-Auth, or we can use the getServerSession function that is also comes from the Next-Auth. And since we are going to create this component dynamically, we're going to use it as the client component, and we're going to use the useSession hook. So first I'm going to mark it with the useClient. Okay, and then here inside the component, we're going to use the useSession hook. So here I'm going to say const and extract the data and rename it to session, for example, and set it to useSession hook that come from the Next-Auth/React. Okay, so the useSession hook is actually a React context that keep the session inside it, and we can use it only inside the client components. So as I said, it's a React context under the hood. So in order to use that, we need to wrap the children of the root layout with the session provider of the Next-Auth, which is actually a context provider. We haven't done that yet, so we're going to do that in a second after creating this component. So in the main div of the component, we're going to say if this session is existed and session has a user inside it. Remember that in the authorize function, we return the user object, and that user object will be kept inside the session.user. So here I'm going to say if the session has the user inside it, we're going to render a p tag here that contains the name of the user. So here I'm going to say session.user.first name plus last name. So as you can see, the user inside the session doesn't have a first name or last name, so we need to fix that type inside the user session. We're going to do that in a minute, but for now let's just put the user.email, and then we're going to put a link here which comes from the next link and set its href to the /API/auth and then /signout. So this API request will be handled by the catch-all route of the Next-Auth. So as I said, everything that starts with the /API and then /auth and then /whatever will be handled by this API route that we have created in the beginning of this video. And then let's put a caption inside the link sign out. Okay, and here let's put a React fragment here to get rid of this error. And then if the user is not in the session, it means that the user is not authenticated. We're going to put a sign in button. So here I'm going to put another link here. Okay, set its href to /API/auth and then /sign in. You can also call the sign in function that comes from the Next-Auth, or you can just call the API inside the link here and then put a caption inside the link, call it the sign in, and that will do the job for you. And let's put some Tailwind CSS classes here in the parent div. We're going to put them side by side. So I use flex here, item center. Okay, and we're going to use the gap 2 for space between the children items. Okay, and then here in the link, we're going to put some Tailwind CSS classes, text sky 500, and on hover, let's set its color to text sky 600. Okay, and let's put a transition color on this link, and let's call the second link here, let's turn it to a button, the button component that comes from the Next UI. Okay, let's import that. And let's specify the av and pass the link component from the Next.js. Okay, and it will act as a link here. So now let's go back to the AppBar component. And now we can put the sign up button instead of this sign up link that we have created earlier. So let's remove that and put the sign in button here. Okay, and let's just remove the second one and fix that just like this. Okay, so now let's go back to the browser, and here as you can see we have an error here, and that's because the useSession must be wrapped inside the session provider. That was the error that I talked about it earlier in this section. So we need to go to the root layout of our application. Actually, we already have a providers component that is a client component. So we just go to the providers here, and here let's just wrap all of them inside a session provider that comes from the Next-Auth. Okay, let's put a parenthesis here. Okay, so now let's go to the browser. We have the sign in button and we just remove the sign up. So let's add the sign up button into our sign in button. Okay, here if the user is not logged in, here let's put a React fragment here and wrap the first button and just copy the first button here, paste it here. Let's call it sign up. Okay, and just call the sign in form that we have created. So we're going to send it to the auth and then sign up path. Okay, so don't confuse this auth path with the API/auth. It is a page, but it's a API route. It doesn't start with the API. These two are different directories. It's in the API directory, but this auth directory is in the root path of the app directory. So now let's save this and get back to our browser. Okay, we have the sign in and sign up. Let's click on the sign in here and you can see we have a really simple sign-in form that is created from the Next-Auth. You can see that the username and password here, these labels, these placeholder and input boxes are created from the credentials object that we have created in the route handler of the Next-Auth. So here, as you can see, we have the credentials object. So for example, let's change the username to username2. Okay, and let's refresh the page. You can see now the user is changed to the username too. So let's fix that, and keep in mind that we can change the labels and inputs of the Next-Auth sign-in page from this credentials object. Although we can have a completely custom sign-in page that we are going to create in the next section of this video, so we don't need to worry about the labels and type of the input boxes in the credentials object in the credentials provider. But if you're using the Next-Auth pre-built sign-in form, you can customize them inside the credentials object. So let's refresh, and now let's put our email. It was sakuradev23@gmail.com. Okay, and put our password 123456 and click on the sign in with credentials. Okay, it gives us an error, and here, as you can see in the address bar, you can see that it gives us an error. You can grab it from the URL. It says that the username or password is not correct. So let's go back to the Prisma Studio. Oh, the email is sakura23, not sakuradev23. Okay, so let's get back here and fix that. Okay, put our password. And here, as you can see, now we are signing into our application, and the email of the user is now on the app bar. So now let's try to put the name of the user instead of its email in the app bar. So I go back to the VS Code, and in the sign in button component, you can see first we check if the user is inside the session object. We're going to render the user.email. So now if I open up the user object, you can see it only has an email, image, and name. But if I go to the Prisma schema, here we can see that the user model has an ID, first name, last name, password, email verified, and a phone other than the email. And also you can see that the name is split into last name and first name. But why inside the sign in button the user has only email, image, and name? That's because the Next-Auth use its own user type. So in order to fix this problem, we need to change the type of the user inside the Next-Auth. So in order to do that, I need to create a type file. So here in the lib directory, I'm going to create a file called types.d.ts. You can create a Next-Auth.d.ts, but I'm going to go ahead with the types.d.ts. The name of the file really doesn't matter. And here first we need to declare the module Next-Auth. So I'm going to say declare module and then Next-Auth. Okay, and then here inside it, we're going to create an interface and name it session. Just pay attention to the spelling. It will actually define the shape of the Next-Auth session. And here inside this session, we have an user object, and its type is going to be the type that is created by the Prisma client. So let's import the user type from the @prisma/client. But if you can't find the user from the Prisma client, make sure to run a npx or bonx prisma generate. It creates all the model types from the prisma.schema file. So let's get back to our Next-Auth module. Here we are actually redefining the shape of the session. We are saying that the type of the user inside this session is going to be the type user that comes directly from the Prisma client. So now if I save this and go back to the sign in button, and now if I open up the user object, you can see we have all the types that we have defined in the Prisma schema. So in order to render the name of the user, we can have a back text here, and then inside it we're going to have the session that user that name, and then a space, and then we're going to render the session that user that last name. Okay, so now let's go back to browser to see if it is working or not. As you can see, it returns the undefined and undefined because it's not enough to just redefine the type of the user inside this session. We're going to handle this problem inside the catch-all routes of the Next-Auth with the help of the Next-Auth Callbacks. So I go back to the VS Code and I go back to the Next-Auth Catch-all API routes, and here in the auth options, we're going to create a callbacks object. So after the providers list here, we're going to have a callbacks. So here we need to use two callbacks, the JWT callback and session callback. But before defining these two callbacks, let me show you what they are and when they are called. So now let me explain the JWT and session callback in a diagram here. When the user signs into application successfully, the JWT callback is called and it receives an object that contains the token and user inside it. The user object is the returning object of the authorized function in the credentials providers. In the other providers like Google and GitHub, the user is the returning object of these providers. Then the JWT callback returns the token, and then the session callback is called and receives the token that JWT callback has returned. And then the session callback returns the Next-Auth session. So these two callbacks are called whenever users sign into our application or when we check the session of the Next-Auth in the client side. But keep in mind that the user object is only available when the user signs into our application for the first time. After that, whenever we check the session of the Next-Auth, these two callback is called, but the user object is undefined. So the user object is only available when the user signs into our application. So we need to check if the user is not undefined. It means that the user is signing into our application. So in order to keep all the properties of the user object in the session of the Next-Auth, we need to put the properties of the user object into the token and then send the token to the session callbacks. So now let's go back to the VS Code and do that in action. Okay, we are in the auth options of the Next-Auth catch-all route. And let's scroll down to the callbacks object here, and let's first define the JWT callback. So here I'm going to say async JWT, and it takes the token, okay, and also the user. Here we need to return the token from this JWT callback. And now let's define the session callback, async session. It takes the token that comes from the JWT callback, and then it takes the session, okay, and we need to return the session from this callback. So the first time the user signing into our application, the user object is available, and after that, every time we are accessing the session with useSession hook or getSession or getServerSession, first the JWT callback is called, but the user object is undefined this time. It returns the token, the session callback is called, and the token that comes from the JWT callback as well as the session is received by the session, and it returns the session object. Actually, the session that we've got from the useSession hook, getSession or getServerSession function is this object that returns by the session callback. So when the user signing into our application, we need to put the user object into the token object and send it to the session callback here. And here inside the session callback, we need to get the user object from the token object and put it inside this session. So in this way, in the sign in button, we can access the user object inside the Next-Auth session. So here first we need to check if the user is available. If user, it means that the JWT callback is called upon the sign-in of the user. We need to say that token.user. As you can see, the token doesn't have a user inside it. We need to change the type of the token, just like in the way we have changed the type of the session inside the Next-Auth. Here we're going to declare a module called Next-Auth/JWT, and inside it we're going to define an interface. I'm going to call it JWT. Why JWT? Because it's the type of the token. So here we're going to say that it has a user inside it, and its type is going to be user object that comes from the Prisma client. Okay, so if I get back to the wrapped handler of the Next-Auth, and here you can see now the user is inside the token. So we're going to set the token.user to the user object that we've got in the parameter. Okay, and we have an error here, and that's because the type of the user that we are receiving from the JWT callback is going to be a adapter user or user. So we just need to set the user as the user type of the Prisma client. Okay, and the error is gone, and then we return the token. And here in the session callback, we receive this token And here we just need to say that session.user equals to token.user. And let's save this. And now let's go to the browser, click on the sign in, put our username here, password. Okay, let's sign in. And now you can see that the name of the user is shown in the nav bar. Okay, so now let's go to the sign in button. And here, when we are reading the session from the use session, let's log the session to see what's going on in the session object. Let's save this and let's open up the console. Okay, here as you can see, we have the session object. It has a user inside it, and you can see it has all the properties that we have defined in the Prisma.schema file. So yeah, in this way we can modify the type of the user inside the Next-Auth session and fill up the session with the user object that its type is compatible with our Prisma client user type. So yeah, that's it for this section. And in the next section, we're going to create a custom sign-in page for our application. Okay, so in the first step, we need to create a page in the app directory. So here in the app directory and then in the auth directory, side by side of the sign up directory, I'm going to create another directory called sign in. And then inside it, we're going to create our page.tsx. Let's create a component here, and I'm going to call it sign in page. And then here first we are going to create a component, a sign in form, which we haven't created yet. Okay, sign in form. And then after that, we're going to create a link here, and let's import it from the next link and say, for example, forgot your password, and then set its href to /auth/forgot pass. We haven't created the forgot pass page yet. We're going to create it in the next section of this video. But for now, let's focus on our sign in form component. So I go to the components directory and now create a sign in form.tsx, and then let's create a component here. Okay, let's save this and get back to our sign in page, and now we can import the sign in form. Okay, so now let's get back to the sign in form and work on this component. So the first step is to create an interface for the props of this component. It is going to have a callback URL, which is going to be a string, and let's make it optional. So we can set the callback URL to this component, and when the user signing into our application successfully, we can redirect the user to the callback URL. So I think we have a typo here. Let's fix that and we're good to go. And let's have the props in the components. Okay, and now we can create our form. But before doing that, let's first create the form schema with Zod for form validation. So here I'm going to say const form schema and set it to z.object. Okay, and here the first property inside this form is email. I'm going to set it to z.string and then .email. And let's put an error message here in case of input text inside it is not a valid email. So we're going to say, please enter a valid email address. Okay, and then we're going to have the password, set it to z.string, and let's have a custom error message. We're going to pass an object to this string function, and here specify the required error. Okay, and then here I'm going to say, please enter your password. Okay, so this is the form schema, and let's infer the input type from the form schema. So here I'm going to say type input type and set it to z.infer and pass the type of the form schema. So now we have the input type. Now we can use it inside the React hook form. So inside the component, let's use the React hook form. So here I'm going to say const an empty object for now and set it to use form, which comes from the React hook form, and inside it define the generic type, which is going to be an input type that we have inferred from the form schema, and then here pass an object and specify the resolver to resolver and then pass the form schema. Okay, now we can extract the register function and handle submit from the use form hook. Okay, so now let's define the form in the JSX. Here let's turn the main div to a form element, and let's add some Tailwind CSS classes, flex, and let's set the direction of the flex to column. So I'm going to use the flex cool and gap 2. That's enough for now. And then inside it, we're going to create a input component that comes from the next UI. Okay, let's define the label. It is going to be username, or let's set it to an email. Okay, and let's register it in the hook form. Okay, specify the email. I think we have a typo here, so let's go back and here fix the email spell, email. Let's save this and come back here. Okay, and we should spread the register and put the email inside it. Okay, and then we're gonna have an error message and set it to error.email.message. We didn't extract the errors here from the use form, so first we need to extract the form state, and then from form state we're gonna have the errors. Okay, so now we can use the errors here, that email, that message. Okay, copy the first input and paste it here for the password. Set the label to password and here register it with the password. And also here set the error message to errors.password. We need to set its type to a password, but before doing that, let me create a visible password button. So here I'm going to define a show pass state with use state. So I'm going to say const show pass, or let's name it visible pass, and set visible pass. Set it to use state and initial value is false. Here inside the password input, let's define the end content and let's render a button, a plain button. Okay, and then inside it, first we check if the visible password is true. It means that the password is showing, so we need to render a /icon. Okay, and let's set its width to W4. Okay, and else if the visible password is false, let's show a icon. Also, let's set the class name to W4 for its width. And here in the button, on the onClick event of the button, we're going to create a toggle function. I'm going to say set visible pass, take the prev and toggle the prev value. Okay, then we're going to have a button element. After the password input, we're going to have a button which comes from the next UI. Okay, and let's set its type to submit. And here for the caption, we can render a sign-in caption here and also a loader when the user click on the sign-in. So first, in order to know if the form is submitting, here we can extract the is submitting from the form state, and here in the button element we can set the disable to is submitting, and then here inside the button element use conditional rendering. Here we're going to say if is submitting is true, just render signing in with 3 dots. Okay, and then if it's not true, just render the sign in. Okay, and the button from the next UI has the props for showing a loader inside the button, and this is the is loading. So here I'm going to set the is loading to the is submitting. Okay, and let's also have a link component for sign up or registering a new user if the user haven't signed up yet. So let's wrap it in a div element. Okay, and let's set its class to flex and item center, also justify center. Okay, and here after the button we're gonna have another button here, and let's set the as component to a link which is come from the next link. Okay, so actually the button is going to be a link but with the shape of a button. And here I'm gonna say sign up. Okay, and here in the first sign in button we're gonna have the color to primary. Okay, and now we can go to the form element and specify the onSubmit function. So here I'm going to say onSubmit and call the handle submit that comes from the use form of the React hook form and pass our onSubmit function. OnSubmit. So we haven't created the onSubmit function, and now let's create it. Okay, so here I'm going to say const onSubmit and set its type to submit handler. As you can see, it comes from the React hook form, and then we're going to specify the input type here in the generic type of the submit handler. So we're going to pass the input type here, and then we can set it to an arrow function here. It is going to be an async, and now we can define the body of the onSubmit function. So in this function, we're going to call the sign in function that comes from the Next-Auth. So here I'm going to say const result and set it to await, and now we can call the sign in function that comes from the Next-Auth /React. So here we need to specify the the provider that we are going to sign in with. So I'm going to choose the credentials here, and then we're going to pass an object, and within that we're going to set the redirect to false. Okay, if we set it to true, it will redirect the user to a callback URL that we can specify here, but it will refresh the page. But we don't want the page to be refreshed, so we're going to set it to false here. And then in order to redirect the user to the callback URL, we're going to use the use router hook and redirect the user manually in this function. Okay, then we need to specify the username here. We're going to set it to data.email, and then we're going to specify the password and set it to data.password. So here we have another options that is callback URL, but we're not going to specify that here because we have set the redirect to false. So we don't need to set it up. Okay, and then we can check if the result is not okay. You can show an error message to user. So here I'm going to say if not result dot okay. We can send a toast to user and call the error function and pass the result dot error message. Okay, and then we can just return the function. Otherwise, we can redirect the user to the callback URL with the use router hook. So we need to create an instance from the use router hook. Here in the components, I'm going to say const router and set it to use router hook. Okay, and here as you can see, we have a type for the props of the component, and as you can see, this props interface has a callback URL inside it. So here at the end of this onSubmit function, we can redirect the user with the router that we have just created and call the push function. And here we can check if the props, the callback URL is existed. We can pass it to the push function. Otherwise, we can specify the address of our home page. Okay, so now let's go to the browser. First, we need to sign out here, and then I click on the sign in. As you can see, again, we are headed to the previous sign-in page. So in order to fix that, I go back to VS Code and I'm going to go to the catch all routes of the Next-Auth. Okay, and here in the auth options, we can specify the pages, okay, and specify the sign-in, and now we can put the address of our sign-in page. So it is going to be on the /auth and then sign in. Okay, put a comma here. Let's save this. I go back to browser and let's go back to the home page. First refresh, and now if I click on the sign in, you can see it will head us to the sign in page, but we have an error here, and that's because we are using hooks inside the React server component. So I just go back to the sign in form and mark it with the use client directive. Let's save that. Okay, we've got another error and we have a link that we forgot to set its href. So I get back to VS Code, and inside the sign in form here, if I scroll down, you can see we have a button that we set it as link, but we didn't define the href of the sign up button. So here I'm going to specify the href to the /auth and then /sign up. Okay, let's save this and get back to browser. Now we are in the custom sign-in form. So now let's get it back and make some changes in the styles here to make it look better. First, we need to remove this semicolon here. And it's not in the sign-in form, so I go to the sign-in page. It's not in the sign-in page, it should be on the root layout. So I'm going to go to the root layout of our application. Okay, it's not there. It might be on the providers component. And yeah, here we have a semicolon. Let's remove that, and as you can see, the semicolon is now removed. I get back to the sign-in form component, and here on the form we need to specify some padding. Okay, and let's put a border here and some rounded class. Let's go with rounded MD, and let's put a shadow. Okay, let's put a form caption here. So I go to the form, and before the first input, we're going to specify a div here, and we're going to set it to sign in form. Let's add some Tailwind CSS classes here. We're going to set its background to gradient. So I'm going to say bg gradient to b. Okay, and specify the from white to slate 200. Okay. As you can see, we have the sign-in caption here. So this color is proper for the light theme. So here we can say if we are on the dark theme, we can set the from slate 700 to slate 900. Okay, so we have a conflict here. Let's specify the dark with the second color here. Okay, get back here. As you can see, we have the form caption here. Let's put some padding inside it, P2. Okay, now it looks better. So in order to fill these areas, first we need to set the padding of the form to 0. Let's remove the padding, and then let's create another div and wrap the contents of the form inside it. Okay, I put it all the way down the form here, and let's save this. I go back here. Now we can put some padding here. So I set the class name to P2. Okay. Now as you can see, we have a better form, but here you can see the caption goes out from the rounded corner. So get back to the form element and add overflow hidden class here. Okay. Now as you can see, the form is in a better shape. Let's give a text center to the caption here. Text center. Okay, get back here. Now it looks better. We need to specify some space between the email and password. So I set the flex here and flex cool for the direction of the flex. Now we can specify a gap between the element inside the flex box. Okay, I go to this div here that contains these two buttons. We need to put some gap here as well. Gap 2, for example, and you can see now the form is look better. And also we need to put this forgot your password link in the center of the screen. So I get back to the VS Code and go to the sign-in page, and here on the parent div, let's specify the class name and set it to flex, items, center, also justify center. Okay, and we need to set the flex direction to call. So as you can see, this is our sign up form. We can also set the width of the sign-in form to W full here. So I go to the sign-in form, and here in the form element, we're going to set the W to full. Okay, now as you can see, it fills up all the width of its parent container. So now let's test the functionality of the custom sign-in form. I'm going to put my email and specify the password. So as you can see, the type of the password input is not set to password. So let's fix that. I go to the password, and here we need to specify the type of the password input. We're going to set it conditionally. We can check if the visible pass is true. We're going to pass the text here to the type of the password input. Otherwise, we're going to pass the password. Okay. And as you can see, we have a button here. So let's set its type to this button in order to prevent the form from submitting. Okay. Now if I enter my password, it doesn't show that. And if I click on that, you can see it toggles between the text input and password input. So I put my email here and put my password here. Okay. So first let me put a wrong password. This is a wrong password. If I click on the sign in, you can see we have the error message and the toast component, and the error message is this error message inside the credentials provider in the auth options of the Next-Auth route handler. So here, as you can see, in the authorize function, as we set it up in the beginning of this video, you can see that if the password was not correct, we throw an error here and we put this error message inside that error. So you can see the error is the same. So when we click on the sign in button here, we call the onSubmit function from the sign-in form here, and inside this onSubmit we call the sign-in function that comes from the Next-Auth. When we call this sign-in function and specify the type of the provider as credentials, it will actually package this username and password and then call the authorize function inside the Next-Auth route handler and put the username and password in this object in the parameter of the authorize function. So in other words, when we call the sign-in function from the Next-Auth with the credentials provider, we are actually calling the authorize function from the credentials provider. So now let's go back to the sign-in form and put the right password here and click on the sign in. as you can see, we are headed to the home page, and now we are signing, and you can see my name on the nav bar. We can also send a welcome message to the user when the sign-in is successful. So let's get back to the sign-in form, and here in the onSubmit function, before pushing to the callback URL, we can toast a success message here. So I'm gonna put a toast here, but this time I'll call the success function and put a welcome message here. So I'm gonna say welcome to Sakura Dev channel. So if you have come to this point of this tutorial, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. Okay, let's save this and get back to the browser. First, let's sign out here, and again put my email and put my password here. Click on the sign in. You can see the welcome message here on the screen. And as a last thing in the custom sign-in page, we need to catch the callback URL from the sign-in page and then pass it to the sign-in form component. So now let's get back to the sign-in page. Here, in order to access to the search params, we need to define an interface here. I'm going to call it props, just like a regular React component. But here we're going to have a search params, and inside these search params, we're going to have a callback URL, and it is optional, and we're going to set it to string. Okay. And now here we can access to the props of the component. So I'm going to set its type to props interface that we have just created. Okay. And now we can extract these search params here. So now let's just log these search params in the sign-in page to see what's going on in the search params. I save this, and here I go back to the browser, and let's sign out first. Okay, as you can see here, we have the Next-Auth automatically puts the callback URL search params in the URL. And if I go back to the VS Code and open up the terminal, you can see now the search params has a callback URL inside it, and it is set to the home page of our application. It is okay. And if I go back to browser, click on the home, and let's click on the sign in again. Now, as you can see here, we have two callback URL, and that is kind of conflicting. It means that the Next-Auth put the callback URL in the URL in 2 times. So if I go back to the VS Code, and here you can see the callback URL in the search params has the base URL, and then it has another callback inside it. So in order to fix that, let's go to the sign in button. Okay, and here in the sign in button, instead of linking to the /API/auth/signin, which is handled by the catch all routes of the Next-Auth, we can just call the sign in function of the Next-Auth. So I remove this here. Okay, and just on the onClick event of this button, we're going to call the sign in function from the Next-Auth, sign in. Okay, and here we don't need to pass anything inside it. The sign in function without any parameter, it just sends us to the sign in page that we have specified in the Next-Auth route handler here in the pages object. So it will actually redirect us to the /auth/signin. So if I save this and go back to the home again, okay, and then if I click on the sign in, you can see now we have one callback URL in the URL. And if I go back to the VS Code here, you can see the callback URL is now without any extra callback URL search param inside it. So now we can catch this callback URL from the search params in the sign in page, and we can pass it to the sign in form. So here, as you can see, we have a callback URL props, and let's set it to search params, the callback URL. And if I go back to the sign in form, you can see here in the props of the component, we take this callback URL, and if the sign-in process was successful, we send the user to the props.callbacks URL. So now let's go back to VS Code here. Let's go to the home page, click on the sign in. Let's put my email, okay, put my password, and click on the sign in. You can see now automatically we've been sent to the home page. Okay, later in this video, when we create other pages in this application, you will see that when we click on the sign in, the callback URL will be set to the address of the current page. Okay, that's it for the custom sign in page. But before moving to the next section, let me show you that we have a bug here. So let's fix that. If I click on this home page, you can see the page will be refreshed. So I go to the AppBar component, okay, and here you can see we have a link here that is send us to the home page, but the type of this link component is not from the next link. It's a link that comes from the next UI, which is actually a anchor tag. So let's remove the link here and let's import it from the next link. Okay, and we don't need the color. Okay, and if I save this, now if I click on the home, you can see the page doesn't refresh, but the default style of the link component is now gone. So we need to manually put some Tailwind CSS classes in the next link component here. I specify the class name here and set the hover pseudo class and say when hover, set the text color to sky 500. Okay, and then add a transition class to the colors of this link component. So now we can see that the link has some style inside it. Okay, that's it for the custom sign-in page. And in the next section of this tutorial, we're going to go back to the sign up form, which is actually for registering a new user. And upon saving a new user into our database, we're going to send a activation account email to the email address of the user with a activation link inside it, so the user can click on that link and activate its account on our application. So don't go anywhere, we're going to learn something new in this section. Let's get into it. So here I'm in the sign up form, and here as you can see on the submit handler of the form, we call the register user server action. So actually we don't need to do anything in the sign up form. We just go to the register user server action, and here after inserting the new user into our database, we need to send an activation email to the email address of the user. So now in this section, in the first step, our goal is to create a function for sending email to users. So in order to send email to users in Next.js or any other Node.js project, we can use NodeMailer. So I open up the terminal, and here we can install it with ban add NodeMailer. Again, you can install it with npm I NodeMailer. And since we are using TypeScript here, we need to install the types of the NodeMailer. So let's clear this up first. And here I'm going to say ban add -t because it's a dev dependency, and then add types /NodeMailer. Okay, now we can use NodeMailer in our Next.js application. So here in the lib directory, first I'm going to create another file called mail.ts. Okay, so in this file we're going to create the functions that are related to mailing. So now let's create a function called sendMail. So here I'm going to say export async function send mail. Okay, and then here we're going to take an object here, and first let's define the shape of the object. So we're going to define a type for it. It is going to have a to property, which is actually is the email address of the recipient. So we're going to set it to string, and then we're going to have a subject, which is actually the subject of the email. So again, we're going to set its type to string, and as a last property we need to define a body, which is actually the body of the email. Again, we're going to set its type to string. Okay, and now we can extract the properties of this object. So we're going to extract to subject and also body from the object parameter. And now we can define the body of the function. Okay, so this is our sendMail function. We need to specify the email address of the recipient, the subject, and also the body of the email. And in this function, we're going to use NodeMailer to send an email. But before doing that, we need to set up a SMTP server. We can do this in two ways. Either we can set up a SMTP server with our Gmail account, or we can set it up with a third-party services. There are lots of these services to set up a SMTP server. First, we are going to set up a SMTP server with my Gmail account, and then I'm going to show you how we can create a SMTP server with other third-party services. So as I said, now let's create our SMTP server with my Gmail account. And in order to do that, I go to my Gmail account, and here I go to my account. Okay, and click on the security tab, and here make sure that you have enabled the two-step verification, because if you don't make it enable, you can't set up your SMTP. I click on the two-step verification, and here I scroll down to the bottom of the page and click on the app password. Here I choose the name for my app. I want to go with the Sakura Dev Auth Tutorial. Okay, and then I click on the create here, and here you need to copy your password here. Make sure you copy that, because if you click on the done here, you cannot see your password again. Okay, and then I go back to the VS Code, and here I go to the env file, and let's create a section here. I'm gonna call it email setting. Okay, and then here I'm gonna create an SMTP email and set it to my Gmail account. So I'm gonna use my Gmail account. Okay, and then I'm gonna create another variable called SMTP Gmail pass. Okay, and then set it to the password that I've got from my Google account. Okay, let's save this, and now we can go to the mail.ts file and our send mail function. Okay, so first we need to extract the variables from the env file. Here I'm going to say const, and then put an object here, and then set it to process.env. Okay, now we can extract them here from process.env. For now, let's save this. Okay, and now we are going to create a transport. So here I'm going to say const transport and set it to nodemailer.create transport. So first let me import the nodemailer here. Okay, so now we can use that nodemailer.create a transport. And now we should pass an object here. First we need to define the service, which is going to be Gmail. Okay, and then we're going to put the auth object here, and then within that we should specify the user and set it to SMTP email env variable that we've got here, and then we're going to specify the pass and set it to SMTP Gmail pass. Okay, that's it. We have created our transport. So now we are going to test this transport. Okay, so here I'm going to put a try catch block here in the try section. I'm going to say const test result and set it to await transport.verify. Okay, and now we can log the test result here. Here I'm going to log it into the console. Okay, here I'm going to put a key here, test result of transport. Okay, and now we're going to put our test result here. And in case of any error, we can catch the error and just log the error into our console. Okay, so let's save this for now, and let's go to the homepage of our application and test this send mail function. So here I go to the homepage here, and here as you can see it's an async function. So here I just want to call the send mail function. I'm going to say await send mail. Okay, and then the parameter object, and here specify the to. For example, let's just specify the same email for the recipient. Okay, and put the subject here. I'm going to set it to test, and put the body. I'm going to set it to just hello world. Okay, so now let's go to our browser. Okay, let's refresh the page, and let's go back to our VS Code, open up the console here. As you can see, we have the test result of the transport, and the value is true. It means that our nodemailer transport is connecting to our Gmail SMTP server without any error. So now let's go back to the send mail function and actually send the mail here. So here, just like testing, I'm going to put another try catch block. Okay, and then here in the try block, I'm going to say const, this time send result, and set it to await transport.send mail. Okay, and here we should pass an object here. First specify the from. Okay, and set it to SMTP email that actually our env variable, and then specify the to, which is going to be the to parameter. Specify the subject. We are getting that from the parameter of the function. Then we're going to specify the HTML here and send it to the body parameter. Okay, and just like the testing, we're going to log the result to the console. So here I'm going to say send result, and in the catch section, just in case of any error, we're going to catch the error and just log it to the console. Okay, so now let's get back to our homepage. We are going to send an email to our email address. The subject is test, the body is hello world. So let's get back to our browser, just refresh the page. Okay, get back to VS Code, open up the console. As you can see here, we just console the send mail. We need to log the send result. Oops, that was a mistake. Now, as you can see on the console of the server, you can see that we have the send result object without any error. It means that the email is sent without any problem. And now let's go to my browser and I go to my inbox. You can see we have already two email that the subject is test and the body is just hello world. Okay, so as you can see, the sender and the receiver of the email is the same. For the simplicity, we didn't use two different email address, but you can just send email to any email address that you want. We just need to change the two parameter here to your desired email address. So that's it for sending an email with the Gmail SMTP server. And now we are going to set up a SMTP server with a third-party SMTP server. Okay, so in this section, we're going to set up a SMTP server with a third-party service. So one of these services that I want to use here is the mail trap. It gives us an email testing endpoint as well as a real email sending endpoint. So here I just logged in with my Google account. Click here on my username. As I said, you can set up a email testing. It's a kind of fake SMTP server. And here we can have a real SMTP server. So if you want to use the real SMTP server, you should have a email address other than free email account like Gmail. You should have your own email address that is belong to your company's domain. So in this tutorial, let's create a fake SMTP server. It just simulates the real email sending process, but it's just not real, but the process is the same. So here I click on the start testing. Okay. And let's add a project. For a project name, I'm going to go ahead with the Sakura Dev Auth tutorial. Okay. Click on the add, and here I'm going to create an inbox. Okay. Just a name here. I'm going to go ahead with the inbox as the name. Just keep it simple. And here, if I click on the setting, here I can use the username and password for our SMTP transport. So here in the integration section, I'm going to choose the Node.js and Node Mailer. Okay. You just create transport with the credentials inside it. I just copy that. Okay. And then I get back to my send email function. And here I just comment the first transport that works with Gmail API. And then here I just paste the code that I've got from the mail trap. You can see we have the username and password. So for the safety purposes, let's move these values to our env file. I'm going to create a variable for SMTP user. Okay, and set it to value that we have here. So let's copy that, put it here. Again, I'm going to create SMTP just pass. Okay, so the Gmail pass is SMTP Gmail pass, but the mail trap path just SMTP pass. So let's go and copy the password here and put it here. Okay, so I go back to the mail.ts file, and in the send function here, we're going to extract the SMTP user here and also SMTP pass, okay, from the process.env file. So here just replace the user with the SMTP user, okay, and replace the pass with the SMTP pass. Okay, and the rest is the same. So let's save this and go back to our browser, and here let's refresh. Okay, and go to the mail trap, and here click on the inbox. You can see we have already two email, and the body of the email is hello world and the sender is Sakura Dev Trip. So yeah, in this way we can create a SMTP server with a third-party service. In the next subsection of this tutorial, I'm going to create a HTML template for the body of our email, and then dynamically put the name of the user and the activation link inside that HTML body of the email. So let's do that. Okay, in the first step, we need to find a service that offers free HTML templates for the email. One of the nice and easy ones that I have found is the befree.io. So here I go to the befree.io and log in with my email account. And here I'm going to click on the create new and choose the create new email here. And here you can choose a template from the available templates, or you can create a blank template and design your own HTML. So here in the categories, I'm going to choose the activation, and here I just choose this one. Okay, click on the start designing. Okay, and here we can change the content in the way we want. So here, for example, let's say welcome to my course. Okay, my authentication course. Okay, and here let's just duplicate that. So here I'm gonna say hi, and then here we want to dynamically put the name of the user. We're gonna put something like a variable. In order to do that, I'm gonna put two curly braces here. Okay, and then inside it we're gonna put our variable. For example, I'm gonna call it name. So this name inside two curly braces would be something like a variable or parameter for this template, and later on in our project we can initialize these parameter or variable. So this is a kind of activation account. For example, let's say here, please activate your account with the link below. Okay, and here let's change the caption of this link. I'm going to set it to activate your account. Okay, and here as you can see we have a URL here. So let's remove that and let me make it a little bigger to see it better. And here, just like the name variable that we have put here, we're going to put two curly braces and then put the name of our variable. So here I'm going to just go ahead with the URL. This email template has two parameter or variable that we can initialize when we are going to send email, the name and URL. So now let's finish our design. I'm going to click on the exit here, and here I'm going to click on the export and just copy the HTML. Okay, so I copy the HTML code and I go back to the VS Code, and here in the lib directory I'm going to create another directory called email templates. Okay, and then inside it we're going to create the activation.ts. okay, and here we're going to export a string constant. So I'm going to say export const activation template, and then set it to a backticks here, and then put our HTML template that we have just copied. Okay, so as you can see, the HTML code is now here, and if I find the name variable, you can see here we have the name in two curly braces, and also let's find the URL variable. Okay, you can see the URL variable inside two curly braces is here. Okay, now we need a tool for initializing these variables in our HTML template. This tool is HandleBars. So HandleBars is kind of like a template engine that can compile and render HTML templates and initialize the variable inside them. Okay, so with that in mind, let's install the HandleBars. So I open up the terminal, and here I'm going to say bound add HandleBars. Okay, so let's close this off, and I go to the mail.ts file, and here I'm going to create an export function. Let's name it compile activation template. Okay, it is going to take the name, which is going to be a string, and URL, which is going to be a string as well. And then here, first we're going to create a template, const template, and set it to HandleBars, which comes from the HandleBars package. Okay, and then call the compile function, and here we need to pass the activation template that we have created in the activation.ts file. So here I'm going to put the activation template that comes from the activation.ts file. Okay, now this template is a function that we can call them and pass the value of our variables and get back a rendered HTML and have our variable initialized in that. So here I'm going to say const HTML body. Okay, this is going to be our final HTML body of our email, and set it to template, and then pass an object. And inside it we're going to specify the name, which is going to be name parameter, and then we're going to specify the URL, which is going to be our URL. Okay, and then we just need to return the HTML body. Okay, we're good to go. Now we can compile the HTML body and we have the send mail function. So I go to the auth server actions file, and inside the register user, after inserting a user with Prisma into our database, first we're going to create our body HTML with compile activation template. So here I'm going to say const body and set it to compile activation template, which is past the first name. So remember, this user is the user object that here we have inserted into our database. And then for the URL, we need to create a dynamic route that takes the ID of the user. So here in the app directory, I'm going to go to the auth directory here and create a activation page. I'm going to say activation, okay, and then it is going to have an ID inside it. It is going to be ID of the user. It is not safe to put the ID in the activation link. We're going to fix that in the next section, but for now, let's keep it simple and see how we can handle this. And then we're going to create our page.tsx file. We're going to create a component here. We're going to name it activation page. We're going to create the interface for the props. Okay, it is going to have a params, and inside that params we're going to have the ID, which is going to be string. Okay, and here let's just grab the params object from the props, and here let's just render the params.id. Okay, that's simple just for now. I go back to the auth actions, and here we're going to specify the ID, something like this. We're going to use the backtext here, or we can just create a variable for URL here. So I'm going to say const activation URL. We're going to set it to process.env.next.auth URL because it will be the base URL of our application, whether we are in the production or development server. So we're going to set it in the env file in a second, but for now, let's put the activation URL here. Let's put it inside a backtext, and here use the template. Okay, and here after the base URL, we're going to put the slash and then auth and then activation. It's the page that we have just created. Then we're going to put the ID of the user. Again, it is not safe to put the ID of the user directly in the activation link. I'm going to fix that in the next section. So for now, just put the result, the ID. So the result actually is the returning user object that is come from the Prisma.user.create function. It is the user object with its ID inside our database. Okay, so that's it for the activation link, and then we can put the activation link in the compile activation template. But before moving forward and forgetting this, here let's just first copy the next URL here and go to the env file and create our Next-Auth URL and set it to localhost 3000 for now, because it's the base address of our application. So let's put it a HTTP here, and later in the production environment, we're going to change the URL to the actual web address of our application. Okay, so let's save this and go back to our register user function. So here we have the body of our email, and now we can just call the send mail function. So here I'm just say await send mail and put the to the user their email and define the subject as something like this: activate your account. Okay, and then put the body here with this body HTML that we have created with the compile activation template, and interpolate the user.firstname and activation URL inside it. Okay, and then we can just return the result from this server action. So now let's go back to our application and click on the sign up here, and let's zoom out, and here let's just create another user. Okay, for example Sakura, and here let's put the email sakuradev23@gmail.com. It will give us an error obviously because the email address should be unique inside our database. So let's just first remove the previous user from our database. So I'm going to use the Prisma Studio here, Ban X Prisma Studio. Okay. Okay, here we just remove the user from our database, and here now we can put the email of the user. Okay, put the phone here, a password, just 1 2 3 4 5 6, really weak password. Confirm that, accept term, click on the submit. So as you can see, the user registered successfully. Okay, so get back here into the terminal. You can see the email has been sent. So I go to the mail trap here. You can see we have a email. So let's open that. You can see template, the name of the user here, and also we have the activate your account. So if I click on that, we are go headed to our page here, and this is the ID of the user inside our activation page. So we have the ID of the user, and now in this page we can get this ID and update the user inside our database. But before doing that, let me emphasize that it is not safe to put the user ID directly in the activation link. For the safety's sake, we need to kind of encrypt this ID of the user and then put the encrypted version of the ID inside our activation URL. So in order to do that, we're going to use the JSON Web Token or JWT to actually encrypt the ID of the user and then put the encrypted ID in the activation link. So let's go and install the JSON Web Token. I'm going to use add JSON Web Token. Okay, and then we're going to need to install the types of the JSON Web Token. So here I'm going to say add and then /d add types /JSON Web Token. Okay, so let's close this off, and then I go to the lib directory, and here I'm going to create a jwt.ts file. .ts. Okay, so in this file we're going to create two functions, one for signing a JWT and the other for verifying and retrieving the data from a JWT. So first I'm going to export a function for signing a JWT. I'm going to say export function, and let's call it sign JWT. Okay, and here we're going to need two parameters here. The first one is going to be payload, which its type is going to be JWT payload. The add comes from the JSON Web Token, and we're going to have a sign-in option which determines the expires time of the JWT. And then we need to have an option object that contains the expired time of our JWT. So first we need to create an interface for the option. So here I'm going to say sign option. Okay, and let's have a expires in, which is going to be a string or a number, and then let's create a default sign option. So I'm going to say const default sign option and set its type to sign option interface that we have just created, and let's set it to an object, specify the expires in, and set it to just 1 day. So our JWT is valid for just 1 day. Okay, so here I get back to the sign JWT function, and let's have an option parameter and set its type to sign option, and let's set its default value to the default sign option that we have just created. Inside it, first we need a secret key. So here I'm going to say const secret key, and let's get it from the process.env.jwt user ID secret. Okay, so let's create this variable inside our env file. Let's put it here, and let's create a random key with OpenSSL. So if you're on a Linux machine, you can use OpenSSL and then rand-base 64 and then put the length of your key. For example, let's say 32. Okay, so here it creates a key with length of 32 for us. Okay, so if you're not on a Linux machine and OpenSSL is not installed on your machine, you can just go with a random key. So let's paste it here. Okay, and let's go back to our sign JWT function, and now that we have the secret key, we can create the token. So here I'm going to say const token and set it to JWT that comes from the JSON Web Token. First, let's import the JWT here. Okay, and we can say JWT.sign and pass the payload and also the secret key. Okay, so the secret key might be undefined here. Let's put a exclamation mark here to emphasize that it is not going to be undefined. Okay, and now we can return the token. Okay, this is the signed JWT, and now we are going to create another function for verifying and decoding the JWT. So here I'm going to export another function called verify JWT. It is going to take a token which is going to be a string, and here we're going to first get the key from our env file. Okay, so I copied that from the previous function, and here I'm going to say const decoded equals to JWT package dot verify, pass the token inside it. Okay, and put the secret key. Okay, so we need to put the whole thing to a try catch block, because if the secret key is not valid or the token has been expired, it will throw an error. So here we need to catch that error. Okay, first log the error. Let's get the error here in the catch. Okay, let's call it E, and then here log the E, which is error, and then just return null. Returning null from this function means that the token was not valid. And here, if the error is not occur, which means that the token was valid, we can return the decoded as and convert it to JWT payload. Okay, so here we are signing a JWT or encrypt our payload with the secret key here, and then here we can verify and decode that token with this secret key. So don't forget to put this secret key in your env file and just keep it secret. Okay, so now let's go back to the auth server action, and here in the activation URL, first we need to create a JWT with the user.id. So here I'm going to say const JWT user ID. Okay, and set it to sign JWT that comes from the jwt.ts file, and just pass the user.id, which is a result.id. Okay, and here let's put a object here. Let's specify an ID and then set it to result.id, which is the ID of the inserted user into our database. Okay, and here instead of putting the plain user ID in the activation link, we're going to put the JWT user ID. Okay, so now let's test it, but before doing that, let's remove the user from our database. Okay, I run the Prisma Studio here. I just remove the user. Okay, and here let's click on the sign up, and let's quickly fill first name, last name, put the email, the phone, password. So this is not a valid phone. Let's add some number. Okay, now the user inserted to our database. So I go to the mail trap here, and you can see we have another email. Okay, I open it and click on the activate your account, and as you can see now we have the JWT token instead of the user ID in the activation page. So in this page we need to first decode the JWT and then update the user in our database and set its email verified to true. Okay, so let's go to the activation page. In the app directory and then auth directory, we have here the activation. So let's rename the ID here to JWT. Okay, it is not necessary, but let's just do that. Okay, we have the activation and then the dynamic route is the JWT. So I go to the page inside that, and here let's change the ID to JWT. Okay, and here let's change this as well. So first let's set the activation page to a async function. Okay, and now here we need to create another server action for activating the user, and then we can call that activate user here and pass the JWT. So this server action takes the JWT, decodes that, and then activate the user inside our database and just return a proper message, and then we can show a proper message based on the result of the activation function to the user in this page. Now let's create the activate user server action. So now let's go to the auth actions, and define the activate user server action. So first, let me create a type for this function. So here I'm going to say type activate user func, for example. So let's say it is going to be a function that takes the JWT user ID, which is going to be a string, and it returns a promise of a string, which is going to be either user not exist or already activated, okay, or success. So this is the type of the activate user function. It is going to be an async one, and that's because we used promise here, which returns a string that is either user not exist, already activated, or success. So let's fix the typo here and we're good to go. Now I'm going to create the actual activate user function. Here I'm going to say export const activate user, and let's set its type to activate user func. Now we can set it to a async function. Okay, here we're going to have the JWT user ID. We don't need to specify the type of this parameter because we have declared that here in the activate user func. And now let's define the body of this function. You can see we have an error here, and that's because it needs to have a return value of this type here. So when we return that, the error will be gone. So first we need to extract the payload from the JWT. Here I'm going to say const payload and set it to verify JWT function that we have created in the JWT file. Okay, and pass the JWT user ID. It is actually the JWT that we will get from the activation page URL. And since the payload is going to be an object that contains ID, so if I go to the register user function, you can see that here when we are going to create a JWT, we're going to create an object, and then inside that we're going to put the ID of the user. So the decoded payload will be an object like this. So here we can extract the user ID just like this. I want to say const user ID and then set it to payload, which is going to be payload.id. So now we can find the user in our database. First, we're going to say const user and set it to await Prisma. Let's use our global Prisma client that comes from the lib/prisma.ts file. So let's set it to await using our global Prisma client. Okay, and user, and then find unique. Okay, here we're going to find the user based on its ID. We're going to specify the where API, and here specify the ID and set it to user ID. Okay, so first we need to check if the user is not existed. We need to return a proper message. So here I'm going to say if not user, which means the user is undefined, we just return user not exist. So as you can see, we have a auto completion for returning value, and that's because we have created a type for this function. This is the beauty of the TypeScript. Okay, so let's move on. And now we're going to check if the user.email verified field is not undefined, which means that it doesn't have a null value. We can return already activated. So if the email verified field has a value, it means that the user already activated its account. Okay, so if none of these two conditions is not the case, we can update the email verified field inside our user table in the database. So here we're going to use the Prisma for updating the user. We're going to say const result and set it to await, and then use the Prisma again, our global Prisma client, the user.update. Okay, and then pass the object. First specify a where API to say which user we want to update. Okay, in the where API we're going to specify the ID and set it to user ID. Okay, and then we're going to specify the data object in which we're going to determine the field that we are going to update. So here we're going to update the email verified. It's a date time field, and we're going to set it to the date time in which user activate its account. So here we're going to set it to a new date. Okay, this will be the date time of the user activation. Okay, we're done with the update function, and after that we just return the success. Okay, so this is going to be activate user function, or so to call server action. Okay, so now let's get back to the activation page, and here let's call the activate user function. So I'm going to say const result and set it to await and call the activate user function from the auth actions. and then pass the params.jwt. Okay, so now inside the main div of the page, instead of showing the JWT, we're going to render a proper message. So first, let me put some Tailwind CSS classes here. Let's set the height to the edge screen. Actually, we are setting the height of this page to the height of screen, and let's use flex cool. And in order to put the items in the center, we're going to set items center and justify center. Okay, so inside that, first we're going to check if the result is user not exist. We check that result equals to user not exist. Okay, we're going to render a p tag, and inside that we're going to say the user does not exist. Okay, and otherwise we're going to check if the result equals to already activated. Again, we're going to put the ternary operator here, and if the result is already activated, we're going to render a p tag again, and you can say the user is already activated. And let's put some Tailwind CSS classes here. Let's set the text color to red 500. Okay, and let's set the font size to a big one, for example text 2XL. So let's put this class name in the first p tag, and then we can check if the result equals to success. We can again render a p tag, and here let's say success, the user is now activated. And let's set the class name here, just change the text color to green 500, and the font size will be 2XL. And if none of these condition is the case, we can just return a p tag again and say, for example, oops, something went wrong. Okay, and let's put the Tailwind CSS classes here and just change the text color to yellow 500. Okay, I saved that, and now we can test it in our browser. Okay, so let's go to the browser, and here in the Prisma Studio you can see that we have a user here, but the email verified is null. So I go to the mail trap here, and here click on the activate your account link in the email. So here, as you can see, it says that success, the user is now activated. So if I get back to the Prisma Studio here and just refresh the page, you can see that now email verified as a date time values, which actually is the date time of the user activation. So now let's close the activation page, and for second time let's click on the activate your account in our email. You can see that the user is already activated message in activation page. Okay, so that's it for the activation page, but one thing we should do here is to go to the route handler of the Next-Auth, and here in the authorize function of the credentials provider, we can add a condition to check if the user has not activated its account. We're going to send a proper message to user. So here, after the last condition, we check the correctness of the password. We can check if user.email verified doesn't have a value, so I put a exclamation mark before that. We can throw an error here just like this, and just change the message to please verify your email first. Okay, let's save this and let's go to the browser. Here in the Prisma Studio, let's put a null value inside our email verified and then save the changes. Okay, now it means that the user has not activated its account. So let's go back to our application and click on the sign in. Here I put my email and put my password. Okay, let's click on the sign in. You can see it returns an error message which says please verify your email first. So in this way, in the authorize function, we're going to check if the user has not verified its email. We're going to send a proper message to user. So yeah, that's it for the user activation functionality in our application. And in the next section, we're going to implement the forgot user password and password reset functionalities in our application. For reset password functionality, we actually need two pages. The first one is forgot password and the second is reset password. In the forgot password, user submits his or her email, and then we check if such an email is existed in our database. We send an email to the user's email which contains a reset password link. This is actually a link to the reset password page. We extract the JWT inside the reset password link in the reset password page from the URL, and then verify if it's valid, we're going to show a reset password form to user in which he or she can reset the password. So in this section, first we're going to create the forgot password page. So in order to do that, I go to the app directory, and then in the auth directory, I'm going to create a directory called forgot password, and then inside it, we're going to create our page.tsx. Okay, let's create a React component here. I'm going to name it forgot password page. Okay, so in this page, we're going to create a single field form which only contains the email field inside it. So first, we're going to create a form schema with z. Okay, I'm going to say const form schema and set it to z.object. Okay, it is going to have an email inside it, which is going to be a string, and then change the email function. And let's put a error message in case of any error. So here I'm going to say, please enter a valid email. Okay, this is our form schema. Very simple. And now we need to infer the input type from the form schema. So here I'm going to say type input type and set it to z.infer and pass the type of form schema as the generic types here. Okay, so now we're going to go to our components and set up the React Hook form. So here I'm going to say const for now an empty object, set it to useForm, pass the input type as generic. Okay, and then here pass an object into the useForm and specify the resolver with the Zod resolver. Okay, and then pass the form schema to the Zod resolver. Okay, so this is for our form validation. And here from the useForm, we're going to extract the register and handle submit. Okay, and also reset function. Then I go to the JSX of the page, and we're going to create our form inside the main div. We're going to split the page into two grids. So I use the grid here, and also grid goals 1 and on medium screens. And above that, we're going to use 3 columns, grid goals 3. We're going to dedicate 1 column to our form and 2 columns to a image for the beauty of our form. So here, let's define our form. Okay, and inside it, first we're going to put a input element, which is coming from the Next UI. Okay, and then specify a label, which is going to be email, and then spread the register function. It only has email inside it. Okay, and then we're going to use start content here for sending a email icon. So I'm going to use envelope icon, which comes from the hero icons, and put a class name here, w4 for its width. So let's save this to break it into multiple lines, and then we're going to pass a error message here, and let's set it to errors.email.message. But first we need to extract it from the use form. So first I'm going to extract the form state, and from form state we're going to get the errors. Okay, let's get back to our input element, and here we're going to send errors.email.message. Okay, so I think that's it for the input, and now we're going to create our button element for submitting. First, from the form state here in the use form, let's extract the is submitting. Okay, and let's get back here, and after the input element we're going to render a button. Okay, so here I'm going to set the is loading to is submitting. That comes from the use form, and we're going to use the disabled if the form is submitting. Okay, and then here in the content we're going to conditional render if is submitting is true. We're going to render please wait. Okay, and otherwise we're going to render just a submit text. Okay, and here in the bottom let's set its color to primary. So this is our form, and here in the on submits here we're going to use the handle submit and then pass a function, for example on submit, or let's call it submit request. Okay, so we haven't created this submit request function. We're going to create it in a minute, but for now let's put our image elements into our form. But before doing that, let's set the type of this button to submit. Okay, save this, and here after the form we're going to use an image. So I use the image image of the next image. Okay, and we're going to set the src, which is a picture from our public directory here, forgot pass. Okay, forgot pass, I've already put that inside the public directory, so slash means public directory, forgot pass.jpg. Okay, and then we need to specify the width. We're going to set it to 500 and also the height to 500. Okay, and then put a class name here. We're going to set the cool span to 2 because we wanted to take 2 columns of our grid layout. And also we're going to put a alt props here after the src. We're going to set the alt and set it to, for example, forgot password. Let's save this, and we have an error here, and that's because we haven't created the submit request yet. So now let's define this function. I'm going to say const submit request and set its type to submit handler, which comes from the React hook form, and pass the input type. And now we can create our function. It is going to be an async one, and it takes the data, which its type is input type, and then we're going to define the body of this function. So now we need to create a server action, for example, forgot password, and then send the email of the user into this server action. But before doing that, let's just log the data and then test our form. So here I put the data here, and also we need to mark this page with use client because we are using the hooks here. Let's save this, and keep in mind that the client components are not that bad that you might think. Okay, so before going to the browser and see the result, let's go to the sign in page, and here you can see we have a link, and its href is set to auth and forgot pass. So let's change it to password. Okay, and let's save this. Okay, so I go to the browser and click on the sign in, and then click on the forgot password. As you can see, we have the form here. Background of the image is not transparent, so let's go back to our forgot password form and change it to forgotpass.png. Okay, as you can see now, the background are transparent. So here, as you can see, this is our form. We need to put some gap here. Okay, so in the form, let's put a class name here, and we're going to set it to flex and flex cool, and then put a gap of 2. Okay, and then a padding p2, and also we need to add a border and a rounded MD for border radius, and also a shadow. Okay, so let's save this, and let's put a items start. Let's save this, and now the form is in a better shape. Let's add a form header inside it. Here in the form, I'm going to put a div here which says enter your email. Okay, and let's set a text center for this div, and also a p2. Okay, let's save this. Now this is better. Let's put some margin into the form. Okay, m2, and now I think it is better. Okay, and now let's just change the item start to item center to put the form in the center of our page, and let's just put the image on the center. So here in the image element and its class name, let's say place self center. Okay, let's save this, and now it's looking better. Okay, so now let's write the forgot password server action. So I go back to VS Code, and here in the submit request function, instead of just logging the data, we need to call the forgot password server action and then pass the data.email to it. So I go to the auth actions in the lib directory. Okay, and here we're going to create a forgot password function, or so to call it server action. I'm going to say export async function, and I'm going to call it forgot password. And then it is going to take an email, which is going to be a string. Okay, and here first we need to check if such a user with this email is existed in our database or not. So we're going to do that with Prisma. I'm going to say const user set to await Prisma user find unique, and then here specify the where and set the email to email parameter. Okay, and then here we're going to check if the user is not existed. So if not user, we're going to throw an error here, throw new error with a custom message. For example, the user does not exist. Okay, and then here we're going to send the email. So here I'm going to put a to do comment here, send email with password reset link. So in order to send an email, we have already set up a send mail function, but first we need to create a template for the reset password email. So to create the template, I go to the befree.io and just click on the last email that we have created, open up the template, and here just change the message here. Okay, we've sent this email because you have forgotten your password. Okay, and then here let's change the message, please, or you can reset your password through the link below. Okay, and change the caption of this link. For example, let's say reset your password, and then change the URL to, let's make it a little bigger. Okay, so actually let's don't change the URL parameter here. Let's keep it URL, and we have to set the name and URL in this email template. We just changed the message inside the template, so we have a typo here. Let's fix that. Okay, and let's save this, and now we can copy the template. So here I'm gonna export and copy the HTML. Okay, and get back to the VS Code, and I go to the email template, and here I'm gonna create another file called, for example, resetpass.ts. Okay, and here I just export a string, so I'm gonna say export const, and let's call it reset password template, and set it to a backtext here, and just put the email HTML that we've got from the template. So let's close this off, and here I go to the mail.ts. You can see we have a compile activation template, so just rename it to compile template. For example, let's remove the activation template. It will rename this function across all the project. We don't need to worry about that. Now it's a generic compile function, and I go back to the auth actions here, and here first we need to create a reset password link. I'm going to use the JWT for creating a reset password. I'm going to say const JWT user ID first. Okay, and set it to sign JWT function, which comes from the jwt.ts file, and then pass an object here which contains the ID, which is going to be user.id. So remember that we retrieve the user here from the Prisma based on its email. Okay, so now we encrypt the user ID, we can create the reset password URL. So here I'm going to say const reset pass URL and set it to backtext here. I'm going to use process.env.next-auth URL and then /auth/reset pass, and then put the JWT user ID. Okay, so this is our reset pass URL. We need to create this page, reset pass. We're going to create it in the next subsection, but for now, let's compile the HTML template of the email. I'm going to say const body, which is going to be the body of our email, and call the compile template, pass the name as the user.name, for example, first name, and then put the reset pass URL. Okay, so this will compile the template with the custom name and custom URL. You know what? We can't use this compile template function because it uses a activation email template. So here, if I go to the mail.ts, you can see here it is going to have the activation template. So either we can create another function, or we can have a third parameter here that determines the template. So we don't want to do that. We just create another function here. So first, let's change it back to compile activation template. Okay, I stand corrected and change it back to compile activation template. Okay, and then we're going to create another function, and let's name it compile reset pass template. So here we can pass the reset password template. Okay, and I go to the auth actions, and here instead of calling the compile activation template, we're going to call the reset pass template. So now we have the body of our email. We can send the email with the send mail function. I'm going to say const send result and set it to await send mail function, and pass the object here. Let's specify to user.email. Okay, and the subject to reset password and body to the body that we've got from the compile reset pass template. Okay, we have a typo here, so let's fix that. Okay, and then here we can return the sound result. So let's save this, and now let's just remove the to do here, and then go back to the forgot password page, and instead of logging the data, we can call the forgot password server action here. So let's remove that, and here I'm going to use a try catch block. Okay, so I get back to the try section, and I'm going to say const result and set it to await, call the forgot password function from auth actions, and then pass the data.email. And then here we can check if the result is not undefined. You can use toast to send a success message to user. Okay, and here we can say the reset password link was sent to your email, and then call the reset function from the React hook form, which actually reset the form fields. And here in the catch section, we can take the error as E and then just log the error first. Okay, and then use a toast that error to show error message to user. For example, let's say something went wrong. Okay, so that's it for the form, and now we can test it in the browser. So let's go to the browser, and here I'll paste my email and let's send it. So it says that the recent password link was sent to my email. So I go to the mail trap here, and here click on the reset password email, and this is the reset password email. And if I click on the link here, you can see it sent me to the /auth/reset path and then the JWT. So now we need to create the /auth/reset path. So I go back to the VS Code, and here in the auth directory, I'm going to create a reset path, and then inside it, we're going to create a dynamic route. Let's call it JWT. Okay, and then inside it, let's create the page.tsx. Okay, so here let's create a React component, and let's call it reset password page. Okay, let's create an interface for the props. I'm going to call it props. It is going to have a params, and inside it, we're going to have a JWT, which is going to be a string. Okay, now we can access to the params here and set its type to props interface that we have created here. We have a typo, so let's fix that. And here we can create a form for password reset. So let's create a separate component for the form here. I'm going to go to the components directory and create a new component. Let's call it reset password form.tsx. And here let's create a component, and then let's create an interface for the props. Okay, it's going to have a JWT user ID, which is going to be a string. Here we're going to access to the JWT user ID. Let's extract it from the props and set the type of the props to props interface that we have just created. So here let's return a form, and inside it we're going to create two input password and then a submit button. So before doing that, let's create a form schema here with Zod. So I'm going to say const form schema, and let's import the Zod first and set it to Zod.object. Okay, we're going to have a password which is going to be a z.string. Okay, let's change the mean function and set mean length to 6, and put the error message for that password must be at least 6 characters. Okay, and then change the max function and put 52 for its max length, and let's save this to break it to next line and put a error message here, say password must be less than 52 characters. Okay, and then we're going to have a confirm password, which is going to be z.string. So we don't need to change the mean and max function, but instead we are going to change the refine function with the z.object, the whole object, and here we're going to pass a callback which takes the data. So the data contains the password and confirm password, and here we're going to return true if the data.password equals to data.confirm password. Okay, otherwise we're going to set a error. So here I'm going to put an object and specify the error message, and here let's say password doesn't match, and we're going to put it on the confirm password. Okay, and here let's infer the input type and set it to z.infer and pass the type of the form schema. And now we can go to our component and set up the React hook form, with this form schema and input type. Okay, so I go to the components, and here let's set up the use form. I'm going to say const an empty object and set it to use form, pass the input type, and inside the use form we're going to pass an object, and here specify the resolver and set it to .resolver, and then here pass the form schema. Okay, so now we can extract the register, handle submit, reset function, and form state, and inside the form state we're going to extract the errors and is submitting. Okay, let's save this and let's go to the form and create the input elements. So we need to create two elements here. The first one is going to be password. So the input comes from the Next UI. Set a label for it, set it to password, and spread the register function. Okay, and register with the password, and put the error message here to the errors.password.message. Okay, we also need to set the type to password, but we need to set it conditionally based on the state visible password. We're going to do that in a second, but now let's create the other input for the confirm password. So here I paste it here and set the label to confirm password and register it with the confirm password, and update the error message here, set it to error.confirm password.message. Okay, so now let's go to the sign in form and copy the code for the show password. Here first we need to create a visible pass state. So let's copy that, and I go to the reset password form, paste the state here. Okay, and let's import the use state. Okay, and get back to the sign in form, and here let's copy this line for setting the type of the input to password or text based on the visible pass. So here I go to the inputs and paste it here on both inputs, password and confirm password. Again, I go back to the sign in form, and here copy the end content for this input, which toggles the visible password, and I get back here and let's paste it on the first input, the password input. Okay, and just import the icons here and paste the functionality for showing the password strength. The password strength is in the sign up form, so I go to the sign up form, and first we need to create a state for the pass strength. So just copy that and paste it in the reset password form. I get back to sign up form, copy this use effect, okay, and get back to the reset password form, and let's just paste the use effect for calculating the password strength, import the use effect and import the password strength function, and just extract the watch from the use form. Okay, and let's just move the use effect below the use form hook. Okay, and here put a comma here, so that fix the error. Okay, we just need to copy the password strength component from the sign up form. So here I copy that and get back to the reset form. I just put the password strength component in the first password input. Okay, so let's save this, and now we can go to the reset password page, and here inside the main div we just render the reset password form. Okay, and we need to pass the JDBT user ID to the params.jdb. So let's get back to the reset password form and just mark it with the use client directive. Okay, so now let's get back to the browser, and here click on the reset password link. So this is our form. We need to put a submit button here. So I get back to the reset password form, and here after the second input, let's just add a div here and set the class name to flex and justify center. Okay, and then inside we're going to paste a button. So let's just go to the forgot password page. Okay, and just copy this submit button, get back here and paste it here. Okay, so we have a button here that based on the is submitting of the form state, render a please wait or a submit button. And let's go back to the form itself, and let's put some basic Differnce CSS classes. I'm going to put a flex and flex correction, put a gap here, gap 2, and a P2 for padding, M2 for margin, and also a border okay, and a rounded MD, and also a shadow. And let's save this and go back to our reset password form. And as you can see, we have a password and a confirmed password. So now let's put it on the center of the screen. So I go to the reset path page, and here put a class name, flex, and justify center. Okay, so as you can see, now the password and confirmed password are in the center of the screen. So now let's put a caption for the form. I go to the reset password form here, and inside the form, let's put a div, let's put a reset your password, okay? And let's put some tailwind CSS classes, text center, and a p2, okay? So let's save this, and here we have the caption, but here we just need to put a dash between the text and center. So as you can see, the text is now on the center of the div. So this is our reset password form. But before showing this reset password form in the reset path page, we need to verify the JWT. And then if the JWT is okay, then we're going to show the submit reset password form. Okay, so in order to do that, I go back to the VS Code, and here in the reset password page, first we're going to verify the JWT. So here I'm going to say const payload and set it to verify JWT function, okay, and pass the params JWT. And here we can check if payload is null. So I'm going to say if not payload, which means that the payload is null, we can return a error message to user. So here I'm going to return a div here, and let's set the class name. I'm going to set it to flex item center and also justify center, okay, edge screen for the height of the page, and text red 500, okay, and also let's set the text size to text XL or 2XL, okay. And here inside the div, we're going to say, for example, the URL is not valid, okay. So let's save this, and let's go to the browser, and let's just tamper with the JWT and put some random string to it, and let's refresh the page, and you can see the URL is not valid error message on the screen. Okay, so now we just need to go to the reset password form, okay, and just write a onSubmit function for the form. So here in the form, first let me set the onSubmit props to the HandleSubmit function that comes from the hook form, and pass a reset pass function. So now let's define the reset pass function here. I'm going to say const reset pass and set it to submit handler type, which comes from the React hook form, and then pass the input type here in the generics. And now we can set it to a async function and take the data here, and now we can define the body of the function. So we have a typo here, so let's fix that. Reset pass, and you can see the error is gone. So in this function, we're going to call a server action for resetting the password into our database. So now let's go to the auth actions here, and here we're going to create a reset password server action. But before doing that, let me create a type for that. Here I'm going to say type reset password func, okay, and then set it to a function which takes the JWT user ID, which is going to be a string, and we're going to take a password which is also going to be a string, okay, and then it returns a promise of this type. So it will return either user not exist or it returns success, okay. So let's save this, and now we can create our function. So here I'm going to say const reset password. This is going to be our server action for reset password, and let's set its type to reset password func. And now we can set it to an async function, okay. It takes the JWT user ID and the password, so we don't need to define the type of the argument. Now we can define the body of the function. So first we need to verify the JWT user ID. So here I'm going to say const payload and set it to verify JWT function and pass the JWT user ID. Here first we're going to check if the payload is undefined or null. We can just return user not exist, okay, and then we're going to extract the user ID out of it. Here I'm going to say const user ID and set it to payload.id, and then we're going to use the Prisma to find the user. So here I'm going to say const user and set it to await Prisma.user.find unique, okay, and then pass an object here, specify the where, and inside it we're going to find the user based on the ID, pass the user ID that we've got from the JWT payload. Okay, and again here we're going to check if the user is not existed. We can return a user not exist message. Okay, so we need to remove this semicolon here, and otherwise we can run a Prisma update. So here I'm going to say const result and set it to await Prisma user that update, and pass a where object here which user we want to update. We're going to pass the user ID here and set it to ID of the user, and then here we're going to specify the data. So in the data object we're going to say that we want to update the password, and now we need to hash the password. So here let's import the bcrypt function. I've already imported it, so let's get back to the reset password function, and here just set it to await bcrypt.hash and then pass the password. Okay, and put the number of salt ram, and then here we can check if the result is not null. We can return a success message, otherwise we can throw an error. For example, let's say something went wrong. So that's it for the reset password server action, and now we can go to the reset password function, and here in the reset path, which is a submit handler, we're going to call the reset password function that we have just created. So here I'm going to use a try catch block. Okay, then a catch. Here in the try block we're going to say const result and set it to await reset password function that we have created in the auth actions. So I think I forgot to export that, so here we need to export the reset password function. Okay, so now let's get back to the reset password form and call the reset password function, and then pass the JWT user ID and the data.password. Okay, and here we're going to say if result equals to success, then we're going to toast a success message to user, toasted success, and we're going to say your password has been reset successfully. And in the catch block we're going to take the error, and here we're going to toast a error message to user. We're going to say something went wrong and just log the error into the console. And yeah, that's it for the reset pass submit handler. So now let's get back to our browser, and let's go first to the email here and click on the reset password again. So here my password was 123456. Now we are going to put it something like 987654, and here let's put it again 987654. Click on the submit, and you can see your password has been reset successfully. Okay, so I go to the sign in, and here I'm gonna put my email. Okay, and now let's put our old password 123456. Click on the sign in. You can see your username and password are not correct. Now let's put our new password 987654. Click on the sign in. You can see it says that verify your email first, so we didn't verify our email. So let's get back here and click on the activate your account link, and now the user is activated. So here let's click on the sign in, and you can see welcome to Sakura Dev channel, and here we are headed to the callback URL, which was the reset password. So we need to put some check if that we are on the reset password page. We just need to redirect the user to the home page. Okay, so that's it for the forgot and reset password. And in the next section I'm going to create a user profile page, and then we're going to talk about how we can protect our pages with the Next-Auth Middleware. And also I'm going to talk about what's the difference between the useSession hook and getServerSession function. So let's get right into it. In this section, we're going to create a profile page, and then we're going to protect it from the unauthenticated users. So I go to the app directory here and then create a profile route. Okay, profile. And then inside it, we're going to create our page.tsx. Here, we're going to create a component here, name it profile page. And then in the first step here, we need to retrieve the authenticated user from the session of the Next-Auth. We can do this in two ways. The first way is using useSession hook, as we have seen in the sign in button. So if I go to the sign in button here, you can see we have used the useSession hook and then grab the session from the returning object of this useSession hook. But we can access to the useSession hook only in client components. But we are going to create this profile page as a server component. So we need to resort to the second way of retrieving this session, which is using the getServerSession function from the Next-Auth. So what is the getServerSession function? It's a function that retrieves the session of the Next-Auth in server side. So here in the profile page, I'm going to call the getServerSession function. So here I'm going to call the getServerSession, and you can see it comes from the Next-Auth. And here we need to pass the auth options that we have created in the Next-Auth API route handler. So here, as you can see, we have an object called auth options and then export it from the route handler. So we need to pass these auth options to the getServerSession function to retrieve the session on the server side. So here I just passed the auth options here, and then here we can grab the session that is returned by the getServerSession. But this is a async function, so we need to use await here and then turn the profile page to a async component, so we can use the await here, and now we can get the session from the getServerSession function. So here I'm going to say const session and then set it to returning object of the getServerSession. So here we can grab the user from the session. I'm going to say const user and set it to session.user. Okay, and then here in the profile page, first we're going to create an image. Here I'm going to use the next image, okay, and set the height 300 pixel and also the width of the image to 300, and we're going to set the src. So let's close this off to have more space here and set the src to user.image. So since the user might be null here, we're going to use the double question mark here and pass a empty string in case of the user is undefined. And then here we need to specify the alt keyword here. We're going to set it to user dot first name, for example, and again use the double question mark here, pass the empty string in case of the user is undefined. Okay, so let's save this, and this is going to be the image of the user in the profile page. We're going to make it a circle shape, so I'm going to pass the class name here and use the rounded full class from the tailwind CSS. Okay, and then we're going to have a kind of table here which shows the user's data. Here I'm going to create a div here, and let's set the class name to greet, and then greet goals for, and also a gap of y4. Then inside it we're going to create a p tag. Let's say first name, and then here we're going to use another p tag, and here render the user dot first name. Okay, now the class name here, and set the call span 3. So we have a 1 call span here, then 3 call span here, which are 4 column altogether. Okay, now let's go for the another row. We're gonna have the last name, then let's pass the user that last name. Next we're gonna have the phone of the user. I'll pass the phone here, and here let's render the user that phone. Lastly, we're gonna have the user that email, so use the email here as the label, and then here in the second p we're gonna render the user that email. Okay, so let's keep it simple here. We have a profile page that has the image of the user and also in first name, last name, phone, and the email of the user. Let's save this, and now let's go to the sign in button, and here if the user is signed in, we are checking if the session is existed, and there is user object inside this session, which means that the user is authenticated. And here we're going to render a p tag with the first name and last name of the user. So here we're going to change it to a link here, a link component that comes from the Next.js. Okay, and we're going to set a href here and set it to /profile. Okay, so let's save this, and now let's run our application. So here I'm going to say npm run dev, and let's open it up in our browser. Okay, so let's sign in here, And here, let's put our email address and put our password. Now, if I click on the name of the user here, we are headed to the user profile page. So obviously we don't have the information about the user, which means that we're not getting this session from the getServerSession correctly. Back to VS Code here, we have an error here which says that the decryption failed. So here we need to go to the route handler of the Next-Auth, and let's close this off here. And here we need to specify the strategy of the keeping session of the Next-Auth. So here inside the auth option object, we're going to specify the session, and here inside the session object, we're going to set the strategy of the keeping the session. Here we're going to set the strategy to JWT. Okay, so the session of the Next-Auth will be turned to a JWT and saved inside a HTTP only cookie, and then we can access to the session of the Next-Auth with the getServerSession function. We can also save the session inside the database, but let's just go ahead with the JWT strategy. Okay, so let's save this, and here let's refresh the page here. Okay, we still don't have the data. Back to VS Code here, let's open up the browser. We still have the decryption failed, and that's because we need to define a variable inside the env file. So here we're going to define the Next-Auth secret. Okay, so pay attention to the spelling here, and here we need to set it to a secret key. I'm going to go ahead with the random key here. Okay, and let's get back to the browser and now refresh the page. And as you can see, we still don't have the data here, and that's because we changed the strategy of the keeping the session. For that reason, we are now signed out from our application. So let's get back to VS Code and check out the terminal here. You can see we don't have the decryption failed error in the terminal, but the session is undefined, and as I said, that's because we're signed out. So let's click on the sign in here, and let's put our email and our password. Okay, so as you can see here inside the profile page, we can see the data about the user. We didn't set the image of the user inside our database, so we don't have the image here, but we have the basic data about the user name, last name, phone, and also the email of the user here in the profile page. So in this way, we can access to the session of the Next-Auth in our server components. So let's back to VS Code. Let's make a recap here. I go back to the profile page here, and here, as you can see, we call the getServerSession function and pass the auth options. So it's really important to pass the auth options to the getServerSession function. Otherwise, you get a null session. So if I go to the API route handler of the Next-Auth, you can see we just create an auth option object and then export it from this file. And here, after the auth option, we have created the handler with the Next-Auth function and then pass the auth options object to this Next-Auth function. One of the mistakes I've seen a lot of times is that some developers don't create the auth options separately. They just create the auth options inside the Next-Auth function here and then try to export the handler from this file. And then here inside the profile page, they try to send the handler as the auth options to this getServerSession function. And if you do that, you get the null session. So make sure that you have created the auth options separately and exported from the API route handler of the Next-Auth, and then anywhere that you are going to use the getServerSession, you need to pass it to this getServerSession. Okay, so that's it for the profile page, and in the next section we're going to see how we can protect the profile page from unauthenticated users. Okay, so in order to protect the profile page, one of the first way that came to mind is to get the session from the Next-Auth. If this is a server component, you can use the getServerSession function to get this session. But if this is a client component, we can use the useSession hook to get the session. And then we check if the user is inside the session. It means that the user is authenticated, and then we can render the page to the user. Otherwise, we can just redirect the user to the login page. So let's see how we can protect the page with this approach, and next we're going to see how we can protect the pages with the Next-Auth Middleware, which is really handy and easy. Okay, so here we can check if the session is not existed, okay, or session is existed but the session doesn't have a user inside it. So I use a not here, then session.user. Okay, so this means that the user is not authenticated. So here we just need to redirect the user to the sign-in page. So I use the redirect function, which comes from the next/navigation, and then pass the /auth/sign-in. Okay, so now let's save this and get back to our browser. Let's sign out here. Okay, and here let's go to the home page and let's manually put the profile address on the browser. So as you can see, we are headed to the /auth/sign-in, but this page is not existed. So here let's go to the auth page. Obviously we have the sign-in. Oh yeah, we misspelled the sign-in page here. Okay, so I fixed that, and let's get back to our browser, go to the home page, and then as you can see, we are not signed in. Okay, so let's manually go to the profile page here. You can see we are headed to the sign-in page automatically. So in this way, we can protect the profile page from the unauthenticated user. Although this approach works without any problem, but if we have many pages that we are going to protect them, we need to manually put this condition in every page that we are going to protect from the unauthenticated user. But there's a better and easier way to protect the pages in the Next.js with Next-Auth, and that's using the Next-Auth middleware. So in order to protect our pages with the Next-Auth middleware, we need to create a middleware file. So here inside the src directory and side by side of the app directory, we're going to create a file called middleware.ts. Okay, so in this file, we just need to export default from the Next-Auth/middleware. So actually we are exporting the Next-Auth middleware as the middleware of our Next.js application. So in this way, each page of our application is protected from the unauthenticated user, but that's not desirable because we don't want to protect the home page of our application from the unauthenticated users, only certain pages. So in order to say on which pages we need to apply this middleware, we're going to export a config object. So I'm going to say export const config, and then inside it we're going to specify the matcher list, okay, and set it to a list here. And inside this list, we're going to specify on which pages we're going to apply this middleware. So here we're going to say /profile. So now our profile page is protected with the Next-Auth middleware. Also, we can use the regex. So for example, let's say we have an admin panel which contains multiple pages. So we are going to protect all of the pages of the admin panel from the unauthenticated user. So in order to do that, we don't need to specify all of the pages here in this list. We just need to say, for example, admin, okay, and then path star. So in this way, every pages that start with the /admin will be protected by the Next-Auth middleware. So let's save this and go back to the profile page. Okay, here we just comment this out, this condition for checking if the user is authenticated or not. So let's comment this out, and now let's go to the browser to test it. Okay, so here in the home page, if I go to the /profile here, you can see we are headed to the sign-in page because we're not signed in, and the profile page is now protected with the Next-Auth middleware. So let's sign in here, put my username and my password here. Okay, and now if I click on the profile page, we can see now we are allowed to go ahead to the profile page. So yeah, that's it for this section. I explained 2 ways for protecting your pages in a Next.js application. You can use useSession hook or getServerSession function to retrieve this session and then check if the user is authenticated or not. Or in the second way, which I recommend to use it, you can just create a middleware file and then export the Next-Auth middleware from that file, and then export a config object and specify on which path you're going to apply the Next-Auth middleware. That's it. And if you want to know how we can implement the role-based authorization in our Next.js application with Next-Auth, I have 2 videos for that. The first one is using just the credentials provider and implement the role-based authorization with that. And in the second one, I have used the Google provider and implement the role-based authorization inside it. You can also find the links of these 2 videos in the description below. below. This brings us to the end of this tutorial. I also wanted to create a section for integrating the Google provider for the Next-Auth, but since I've already have a separate video for this topic, I just put a link in the description below so you can watch it if you want to integrate the Google provider for the Next-Auth in your Next.js application. So if this video was useful for you, please hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, you can support me and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any suggestion about the next video, you can tell me in the comment section below. Have a nice time. Bye bye.